This charred violin, a family treasure. Who'll start the bidding? 100. 150. Do I hear two? Yes, you get two here. Twice. Go once. Twice. Sold for 250.
My family's memories, gone.
Look at this old thing. Soot covered and worthless. Who'd even want this junk? Pathetic. Good riddance.
The auctioneer held up my charred violin while strangers stared at what remained of my life. Then my grandson Mason laughed and said, "Nobody's paying $40 for Grandma's burnt junk." My son Nathan did not laugh. He watched me too closely. I stood in the doorway of the home my late husband and I had built together while my own family sold my memories piece by piece. Then Ava, my granddaughter, stepped forward and asked to hold the violin. She gently touched its blackened wood, tightened one surviving string, and lifted the bow. The first note made the whole room go silent, and when Nathan's face turned white, I knew that violin had never been worthless. If this story touches your heart, please like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if your own family tried to sell your memories, and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. 3 months before Mason lifted that burned violin in front of a room full of strangers, my life was quiet. Not perfect, not easy, but quiet. At 69, I had learned that quiet could be its own kind of blessing. My name is Charlotte Harris, and for 42 years, I lived in the same red brick house on the east side of Columbus, Ohio. It was the house my husband Arthur and I bought when interest rates were high, our savings were low, and we still believed a good future was something you built with your own hands. Arthur painted the living room himself, though he got more paint on the windows than the walls. I planted the rose bushes along the front walkway. We raised our son Nathan in that house. We hosted Thanksgiving dinners in that house. We cried there when my mother passed away. We danced there after Arthur got his first big restoration contract. And 5 years before everything fell apart, I held Arthur's hand in that house as he took his last breath. After he died, people kept asking whether I planned to sell. Charlotte, at that place is too big for one woman. Wouldn't you be happier somewhere easier to manage? Don't you get lonely? I did get lonely, but lonely and ready to leave were not the same thing. The house still carried Arthur in its corners. His old work boots sat beside the back door. His favorite coffee mug stayed on the highest shelf because I could not bring myself to move it. And behind the house stood the small detached workshop where he spent nearly every Saturday of our marriage. Arthur restored violins, not the kind you saw in glossy catalogs or expensive music stores. He found battered instruments at estate sales, church basements, old barns, and flea markets. Violins with cracked wood, broken bridges, missing strings, and dusty cases. People would see them and shake their heads. Not worth saving, they would say. Arthur never agreed. He used to run his fingertips over the wood the way some people touch the face of an old friend. Everything has a voice, he would tell me. Some things just need somebody patient enough to listen for it. That was Arthur. He believed people could be restored too. Maybe that was why I loved him. After he passed, I did not have the heart to open the workshop for almost a year, but eventually I began going inside again. At first, I only dusted. Then I organized his tools. Later, I started letting neighborhood children come by for simple music lessons in the front room of the house. I had spent 37 years teaching music in public schools, and retirement had not changed the part of me that loved watching a child discover they could create something beautiful. A few times a week, I taught beginner piano to kids whose parents could not afford private lessons. I charged almost nothing. Sometimes I did not charge at all. It gave my days rhythm. Monday afternoons were for piano. Wednesday mornings were for the garden. Friday evenings were for Ava. My granddaughter Ava was 16, quiet in a way that made people assume she was shy. But she was not shy. She simply noticed things before she spoke. She had Arthur's eyes. Not the color. Arthur's were gray and Ava's were brown. But the way she looked at the world, like every object had a story, and she did not want to interrupt it too soon. She loved the violin from the time she was 8 years old. Arthur gave her a tiny student violin that he restored himself. It had a faint scratch along the back and one slightly uneven tuning peg. But Ava loved it as if it were made of gold. Every Friday she came to my house after school, dropped her backpack by the kitchen table, and practiced in the living room while I made grilled cheese sandwiches. Sometimes she played beautifully. Sometimes she sounded like she was trying to wake the dead. Arthur would have loved both versions. That particular violin, the one Mason later called burnt junk, had always been different. Arthur gave it to me on our 40th wedding anniversary. We did not take a fancy trip or throw a big party. Arthur cooked spaghetti, burned the garlic bread, and gave me a small black violin case wrapped in brown paper. I remember laughing when I opened it. "A violin?" I asked. "You know I only played piano." He smiled and said, "I know, but this one chose you." Inside was the most beautiful violin I had ever seen. The wood was deep amber, warm and rich beneath the lamplight. It had delicate curves and a scroll that looked almost hand-carved from a dream. Arthur told me it had been damaged when he found it years ago. He had restored it slowly, carefully, one piece at a time. It survived more than most people will ever know, he said. At the time, I thought he was talking about the instrument. Now I wonder if he was talking about us. The violin stayed in the workshop after that. I never learned to play it properly, but Arthur would take it out sometimes and let Ava hold it with clean hands. He told her not to be afraid of the old instruments. Music does not belong only to people with money, he told her once. It belongs to anyone brave enough to make a sound. Ava remembered everything he said. Mason did not. Mason was 18 by then, tall and restless, always staring at his phone as though the real world had become too slow for him. When he was younger, he used to follow Arthur into the workshop and ask 100 questions. He wanted to sand wood. He wanted to polish old cases. He wanted to know why violins had such strange shapes. But somewhere along the way, he changed. He started caring about brand-name clothes, new trucks, and whether people at school thought his family had money. He stopped coming by unless his parents made him. When he did, he looked around my little house with embarrassment. One afternoon, I heard him whisper to Ava in the hallway, "Grandma's place smells like old people and dust." Ava snapped back, "Then leave." I pretended not to hear, but I did. A few weeks later, Nathan started visiting more often. At first, I thought he missed his father. Nathan was 44, my only child, and he had always been good at looking worried when he wanted something. He worked in home renovation. At least he used to. His company had once done well. Kitchens, decks, small remodels, but lately he talked about delayed payments and jobs falling through. He came by with coffee and asked how I was sleeping. Then he asked about the workshop. "Did Dad keep records of the stuff he restored?" he said one afternoon. "Probably," I answered. "Why?" "Just curious." A few days later, he asked whether Arthur had left any insurance papers in the house. Then he asked about the title to my home. Then he asked whether I had ever had the violin appraised. Each question was wrapped in a casual tone. Each question came with a smile. But after the third time, I started paying attention. One Friday evening, Ava was practicing in the living room when Nathan walked in and paused by the workshop door. His eyes landed on the black violin case resting on the shelf. "Still keeping that old thing?" he asked. I looked at him. "It was your father's." Nathan shrugged. "It is just a violin, Mom." But Arthur's words came back to me then, clear as a bell. He had said them years earlier while locking the workshop for the night. "That violin will protect the right person when the time comes." I laughed at him then. I did not laugh now. The following Sunday, Nathan came to my house with Brooke and Mason. That alone would not have seemed unusual once. Families visit on Sundays. They bring coffee, sit in the kitchen, complain about traffic, and ask what is for dinner. But that afternoon, they came carrying folders. Brooke had one tucked beneath her arm. Nathan had another in his hand. Even Mason, who usually arrived with his eyes locked on his phone, looked too alert. Ava was already at my house. She sat at the dining table with her violin case beside her chair, finishing a glass of iced tea after our usual Friday lesson had turned into a weekend visit. The moment Nathan stepped inside, she looked toward the folders. So did I. Mom? Nathan said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. You look tired. I'm 69, Nathan, I said. Not terminal. He gave a little laugh, but it did not reach his eyes. Brooke followed him in with a container of store-bought lemon bars. She set them on the counter as if she were bringing a peace offering. We've just been worried about you, she said gently. Ever since Arthur passed, you've been carrying everything alone. I looked around my kitchen. The yellow curtains I had sewn 20 years earlier still hung over the window. Arthur's old wooden clock ticked above the refrigerator. On the wall was a framed school photo of Nathan at age 7, holding a plastic recorder and smiling without a single worry in the world. I have been carrying things alone for 5 years, I said, and somehow I am still standing. Nathan pulled out a chair. That's exactly what we mean, he said. You shouldn't have to keep standing alone. There was something practiced in the way he said it. I noticed it because I had spent 37 years teaching children. I knew the difference between words that came from the heart and words that had been rehearsed. Brooke sat beside him. We've been looking at some options, she said. There are beautiful retirement communities near Dublin. Safe places, activities. Other people your age, a nurse on staff. You would not have to worry about the stairs, the yard, or that old workshop. Her eyes flicked toward the window, where Arthur's workshop stood at the far end of the backyard. I felt a tightness in my chest. I like my stairs, I said. I like my yard. And I especially like my workshop. Of course you do, Brooke replied quickly. But liking something and being able to manage it are different things. Ava shifted in her chair. It was a small movement, but I saw it. Nathan opened the folder he had brought. Mom? This isn't about pushing you, he said. It's about being realistic. The house is worth a lot right now. You could sell it, move somewhere comfortable, and have money set aside for yourself. I looked at the papers. There were glossy brochures for retirement communities, a list of estimated sale prices for homes in my neighborhood, a printed sheet showing the taxes on my property. My property. Not ours, not the family house. Mine. I didn't ask you to research my home, I said. Nathan leaned back in his chair, the way he did whenever he wanted to appear wounded. We're trying to help. You are trying to make decisions for me, no mom. I'm trying to make sure you don't get taken advantage of. The words hung in the room. I almost laughed, because the people most eager to warn you about strangers are sometimes the people hoping you will not notice their hands already reaching into your purse. Mason looked up from his phone. Grandma Dad's right, he said. That house is huge. You barely use half of it. I stared at him. For a second, all I could see was the little boy who used to run through that same kitchen in superhero pajamas, laughing while Arthur chased him with a dish towel. Now he looked at me like I was an inconvenience taking up valuable space. I use every part of this house, I said. Quietly, maybe not every day, but every room belongs to my life, Mason shrugged. It's just old stuff. Ava's face changed, not dramatically. She did not shout. She did not slam her hand on the table, but I saw her eyes narrow. Old stuff, she asked. Mason glanced at her. You know what I mean? No, Ava said. I don't. Brooke sighed as though Ava had created an unnecessary problem. Let's not turn this into a fight, she said. Nobody is saying Charlotte's memories don't matter. But she had not called me Mom. She had called me Charlotte. That was when I knew she had already begun thinking of me as a person outside the family. Someone whose things could be sorted price Donated sold. Nathan closed the folder and folded his hands. The truth is, Mom, my business has been under a lot of pressure lately. There it was. The real reason had finally entered the room. He explained that 2 clients had delayed payment. A supplier had increased prices. A renovation project in Grove City had gone wrong, costing him more than he expected. He said he only needed temporary help until the next big contract came through. A loan, he said. Not a handout. Just enough to get me through a few months. My stomach tightened. How much? Nathan hesitated. $75,000. For a moment, no one spoke. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Outside, wind pressed against the bare branches in the backyard. $75,000. He said it as though he were asking to borrow my car. I don't have that kind of money sitting around, I said. Brooke leaned forward. But you do have assets, she said softly. The house, Arthur's workshop, some of those old instruments, the insurance policies. You could use the equity. You would not even feel it. I looked at her. You think I would not feel losing part of my home? That's not what I meant. It is exactly what you meant. Nathan's jaw tightened. Mom, I'm not asking you to lose your house. I'm asking you to trust your son. There were times in a mother's life when guilt could make her weak. When your child looked tired, scared, or desperate, you wanted to give them whatever they asked for, just to make that expression disappear. But I had already learned something after Arthur died. Love without boundaries was not love. It was surrender. I'm sorry your business is struggling, I told Nathan. I truly am. But I will not borrow against my home to solve problems I did not create. Brooke's smile disappeared, only for a second, but I saw it. Nathan looked down at the papers, then back at me. What about Dad's records, he asked. The question came too quickly. What records? The workshop records. Appraisals. Sales records. Maybe there's something valuable in there you don't even know about. Ava's hand tightened around her glass. I felt the air change. Nathan continued pretending not to notice. Dad restored a lot of instruments. Maybe some of those things are worth more than you think. You should let me go through the paperwork. I could organize it for you. No, I said. His expression shifted. Mom? No. I stood slowly from my chair. It was not a dramatic movement. My knees ached, and I had to steady myself against the table. But when I looked at Nathan, I made sure my voice did not shake. You can ask me for help. You can tell me the truth about your problems. You can even be disappointed when I say no. But you will not come into my home with brochures folders and plans for my future as though I am already gone. Nathan's face went pale with anger. Brooke looked down. Mason rolled his eyes, and Ava stood beside me, not touching me, not speaking, just standing. That was enough. Nathan gathered his papers. Fine, he said, but don't blame me later when you realize we were trying to protect you. I watched him walk toward the door. Then he paused beside the hallway shelf. His eyes landed on the black violin case. For only a moment. But the look on his face was not concern, it was calculation. And when the front door closed behind him, I realized something that frightened me more than his anger ever could. Nathan did not want to protect me. He wanted control over what Arthur had left behind. 3 nights after Nathan left my kitchen with his folders and his wounded expression, the rain came. It began as a soft tapping against the bedroom window sometime after midnight. By 1 in the morning, it had turned into a hard spring storm, the kind that made the old maple tree outside scrape its branches against the roof. I had never slept well during storms. Arthur used to say I worried about weather the way other people worried about money. Whenever thunder rolled across Columbus, I would get up to check the windows, make sure the basement door was locked, and look out toward the workshop. That night was no different. I woke suddenly with a strange heaviness in my chest. At first I thought it was thunder. Then I smelled smoke. Not fireplace smoke. Not the faint scent that lingered after a neighbor grilled too late in the evening. This was sharp. Bitter. Wrong. I sat up in bed so quickly that my knee hit the wooden frame. Arthur. I whispered out of habit. For one foolish second, I expected him to answer from beside me, but his side of the bed was empty, as it had been for 5 years. Then I saw the orange light flashing against the curtains. I rushed to the window. The workshop was on fire. Flames climbed out of the roof like angry hands. Smoke twisted into the rain-soaked night sky, thick and black against the darkness. The small building where Arthur had spent decades restoring broken violins was burning so fiercely that I could feel the heat from the upstairs window. My hands started shaking. I grabbed my robe, slipped into my shoes without socks, and ran downstairs. By the time I reached the back door, the rain was coming down in sheets. I could barely see across the yard. The workshop windows had exploded, and fire was pouring through the openings. For a few seconds, I stood frozen on the porch. That little building held more than tools and old wood. It held Arthur's hands. It held his notes, his restoration ledgers, his photographs, his favorite radio, his old stool with the torn green cushion. It held the small pieces of our life that never made it into family albums, but mattered all the same. Then I remembered the violin, the black case, the one Arthur had given me. I had moved it into the workshop 2 days earlier, after Ava practiced with it. I had meant to bring it back into the house. I had forgotten. No, I whispered. I started toward the workshop, but the heat pushed me back. My eyes began to sting, and the smoke caught in my throat. I had taken only a few steps into the yard when I heard sirens in the distance. A neighbor must have called 911. Within minutes, fire trucks crowded the narrow street behind my house. Red lights flashed across the wet pavement. Firefighters ran through my backyard with hoses shouting instructions I could barely understand. One of them took my arm and guided me away from the porch. "Ma'am, you need to move farther back." "My workshop," I said. "There's something inside. We're handling it." "There's a violin in a black case." He looked at me with the exhausted patience of someone who had heard 100 people beg to save one more thing. "We'll do what we can, but you cannot go in there." I watched from the far side of the yard as water poured onto the roof. Steam rose in the thick white clouds. The workshop groaned and cracked under the weight of the fire. It sounded like something alive dying. By the time the flames were under control, the storm had slowed to a cold drizzle. The workshop was still standing, but only barely. The roof had collapsed over one side. The front wall was blackened. Windows were gone. Everything inside looked drowned, burned, or buried beneath wet ash. I felt numb. A firefighter approached me with a flashlight in his hand. "Ma'am," he said, "we were able to retrieve a few items near the back wall. Most of it is heavily damaged." He held out a black case. At first, I did not recognize it. The leather was blistered. The metal clasps were dark with soot. Water dripped from the edges. But I knew that shape. My breath caught. "That's it," I whispered. My fingers trembled as I opened the case. The violin inside looked wounded. The amber wood Arthur had once polished until it shone was covered in soot. One side was blackened. The bridge had collapsed. The strings hung loose and twisted. The neck seemed slightly warped from the heat. For a moment, I could not touch it. It felt like touching a body after a funeral. Then I reached down and brushed my thumb over the scarred wood. It was still there, broken, burned, and nearly unrecognizable, but still there. "Charlotte." I turned. Nathan was rushing through the side gate, holding an umbrella over his head. Brooke followed behind him, wearing a long beige raincoat and looking more annoyed than frightened. Mason came last, dragging his feet through the wet grass. I had not called them. Someone else must have. Nathan came straight toward me and put his hands on my shoulders. "Mom, are you okay?" I nodded because I did not trust my voice. He looked past me at the workshop, then down at the violin case in my hands. His expression changed so quickly that I almost missed it. Not grief, not shock. Relief. Then he covered it with a frown. "Jesus," he muttered. "That thing is destroyed." I stared at him. It was your father's. It was an old violin, Mom, Nathan said. You can't save everything. The words cut deeper than he knew. Or maybe he knew exactly how deep they would cut. Brooke stepped closer and looked inside the case. Oh, Charlotte, she said softly. I'm sorry. But Nathan is right. It's probably unsafe to keep. Mold, smoke, damage, all of that. You should throw it away. Throw it away. As though Arthur's hands had not held it. As though Ava had not played it. As though a life could be measured by how cleanly it survived a fire. I'm keeping it, I said. Nathan sighed. Mom, I said I'm keeping it. For the first time that night, his face hardened. Then a man in a dark fire department jacket approached us. He was broad-shouldered, somewhere around 50, with tired eyes and rainwater dripping from the brim of his cap. I'm Investigator Mark Dalton, he said. I'll need to ask you a few questions once you've had a moment. He spoke gently, but his eyes kept moving toward the workshop. Was anyone using the building tonight? He asked. No, I said. No one had been in there. Any electrical issues recently? Not that I know of. Any chemicals stored inside wood polish varnish cleaning supplies? Nothing unusual. Mark nodded and made notes on a small pad. Then he looked toward the side of the workshop. Do you usually leave the side door open? I followed his gaze. The door was barely visible through the smoke and debris. It had been damaged by the fire, but I could see what he meant. A piece of metal had been wedged near the frame. My stomach tightened. No, I said slowly. Arthur always locked that door. I lock it too. Mark crouched near the ground, studying something beneath the rainwater. He did not say much after that, but when he stood again, he had a different look on his face. Ma'am, I can't determine the cause tonight, he said. We'll need a full investigation. For now, don't touch anything inside the workshop. And please let us know if you remember anything unusual. I nodded. Then the wind shifted. For a second, the smoke blew toward us. And beneath the smell of wet ash, burned wood and rain, I caught something else. A sharp chemical odor. It was faint, but unmistakable. I had smelled it years ago when Arthur cleaned old tools in the garage. Fuel. My eyes moved toward Nathan. He was already standing beside Brooke, speaking quickly about insurance. Mom has coverage, he told her. I'll help her call first thing in the morning. We need to make sure she documents everything before the adjuster comes. I stood there holding Arthur's ruined violin while my son discussed policies, claims, and property values. Not once did he ask what the workshop had meant to me. Not once did he say he was sorry that the last place where I still felt Arthur close had burned to the ground. Later, after the firefighters left and the rain finally stopped, I sat alone at my kitchen table. The violin case rested in front of me. I opened it again. The instrument looked worse under the bright kitchen light. Black ash clung to the curves. The wood was cracked. One corner had blistered from the heat. But as I looked closer, I saw something strange. The inside pocket of the case had been opened. I was certain Arthur had always kept a small folded cloth there. It was where he stored a few old maintenance notes and a handwritten card he once gave me. Now the pocket was empty. I sat very still. Then I remembered Nathan asking about Arthur's records, the workshop papers, the appraisals, the violin. Outside the ruined workshop stood dark against the wet night. And for the first time, I allowed myself to think the thought I had been fighting since the fire began. Maybe it was not an accident. The morning after the fire, I woke in my own bed with smoke in my hair and a heaviness in my lungs that no amount of coffee could clear. For a few seconds, I forgot what had happened. Then I looked through the bedroom window. The workshop stood at the back of the yard like a blackened skeleton. That was when it all came rushing back. Arthur's tools, the photographs, the ledgers, the violin, and Nathan's face when he saw it. By 8 o'clock, Nathan was standing in my kitchen with 2 cups of coffee and a voice so calm it made me uneasy. Mom, you can't stay here right now, he said. I was sitting at the table in the same robe I had worn during the fire. The charred violin case sat on the chair beside me close enough that my hand could reach it. I'm staying in my house, I said. The fire department said there could be smoke damage. The adjuster needs to inspect everything. You need rest. I can rest here. Brooke came in behind him, carrying a reusable grocery bag filled with travel-size shampoo toothpaste and a folded gray sweater. She set it on the counter, as though the decision had already been made. We booked you a room at the Hampton Inn near the airport, she said, just for a few nights. It's clean quiet, and they have breakfast downstairs. I looked at her. You booked a hotel room without asking me. Brooke pressed her lips together in that careful way she did when she wanted to appear patient. Charlotte, we were trying to make things easier. Nothing about that sentence made me feel easier. Nathan pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. You've been through a traumatic night, he said. You don't need to sleep in a house that smells like smoke and stare at that burned-out building every time you look outside. I knew he was right about one thing. The house did smell like smoke. Every curtain, every blanket, every piece of clothing had absorbed it. Even the walls seemed to carry the bitter scent of what had burned. But there was a difference between needing help and being pushed aside. I'll stay at the hotel for 2 nights, I said at last. No longer. Nathan nodded too quickly. Of course, 2 nights. Whatever you need. Within an hour, he had packed a small suitcase for me, not me, him. He chose my clothes without asking. He put 2 blouses, 1 pair of slacks, a cardigan, and my nightgown into the case. Brooke added a pair of slippers. I watched them move around my bedroom, opening drawers and lifting things from shelves, while I sat at the edge of the bed feeling strangely like a guest in my own life. When I reached for the violin case, Nathan stopped me. Mom, leave that here, he said. I looked at him. No. It could be damaged further in the hotel. It is coming with me. His jaw tightened. Then he gave a little smile. Fine. Of course. But I saw the irritation behind his eyes. Before we left, Nathan held out his hand. Give me your keys, he said. I need to let the cleaning crew in and meet the insurance adjuster. I can give you a spare. Mom, the whole place is a mess. You don't need to worry about keys, mail contractors, or paperwork right now. Let me handle it. The words sounded caring, but something inside me resisted. I looked toward the counter where my house keys rested beside Arthur's old coffee mug. Nathan followed my eyes. I promise, he said quietly. I'm trying to help you. For a moment, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe my son was still the little boy who used to fall asleep against my shoulder after bad dreams. I wanted to believe that the man sitting in front of me had not become someone I needed to protect myself from. So I gave him the keys. Then he asked for my phone. Just in case the insurance company calls while you're resting, he said. I can answer anything important. I held onto the phone a little tighter. I'll keep my phone. Mom? You barely hear it half the time. I hear enough. Brooke gave a small laugh that did not sound friendly. Nathan leaned forward. You're exhausted. Please stop making this harder than it needs to be. That sentence stayed with me. Not because it was loud, because it was not. It was spoken softly, almost kindly, the way someone might speak to a difficult child. After a long pause, I put my phone in my purse instead of handing it over. Nathan did not argue again. But when we arrived at the hotel, I discovered he had already changed the password to my email account to protect me from scams. At least, that was what he said. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was being suspicious because I was tired. The first day at the hotel passed in a fog. Nathan said he was meeting the insurance adjuster. Brooke said she was going back to the house to pack up anything that could be damaged by smoke. They both promised to bring me updates. Neither of them came back until after dark. When they did, they brought takeout soup and a stack of papers. Just insurance forms, Nathan said, placing them on the small desk beside the hotel television. I looked at the pages. There were too many. Some had highlighted sections. Some had sticky notes. One was a list of items for valuation. My dining table, Arthur's workbench, the framed painting in the hallway, the old grandfather clock, and under a section labeled Miscellaneous Antiques, I saw a line that made my stomach turn. Old string instruments and accessories. "What is this?" I asked. Nathan did not look at me. "The adjuster needs an inventory." "Why are you valuing my things already?" "Because that's how insurance works." "No," I said slowly. "That is how selling works." Nathan finally looked up. His expression was flat. "Mom, nobody is selling anything." Brooke folded her arms. "You're reading too much into this." I wanted to argue, but I was tired. My chest hurt. My mind felt slow from lack of sleep. And that was the most frightening part. They knew I was tired. They knew I was grieving. They knew I was vulnerable. The next afternoon, Ava came to see me. She arrived without calling first. Her backpack still on one shoulder, her hair damp from the rain outside. The moment she stepped into the hotel room, she looked at me for a long second. Then she shut the door behind her. "Grandma," she said, "why are you here?" Nathan thought it was best. Ava's face hardened. "Did you agree to let them pack up your house?" "I agreed to let them protect things from smoke damage." "That's not what they're doing." She reached into her backpack and pulled out her phone. "I found something online." She handed it to me. On the screen was a local estate auction website. At first, I did not understand what I was looking at. Then I saw the photographs. My photographs. The blue sofa Arthur and I had bought after Nathan graduated high school. The brass lamp from the living room. The porcelain bowl my mother gave me when I got married. Each item had a number beneath it. Each item had a starting bid. My throat closed. "Where did you get this?" I whispered. "A friend from school sent it to me," Ava said. "Her mom follows estate auctions. She recognized your dining room." I scrolled through the listings. There were dozens, maybe more. And then I saw a photo of the workshop door. The description beneath it read, "Fire-damaged antiques instruments, collectible materials sold as is." My hands began to shake. I never agreed to this. "I know," Ava said. She sat beside me on the edge of the bed. "Dad said you wanted to downsize," she continued. "He told Mom you were moving somewhere safer. But I knew something was wrong." I looked at her. "Your father knows about this." Ava lowered her eyes. "Dad is the one who posted it." For a moment, I could not speak. My own son, the boy I had carried through fever school, failures, heartbreaks, and every difficult season of his life. He was standing in my home taking pictures of my belongings and offering them to strangers while I sat in a hotel room with a smoke-stained suitcase. Ava reached into her backpack again. "There's more." She pulled out a white envelope. "I went by the house after school," she said. "There was mail on the floor near the front door. I grabbed this before Dad saw me." The envelope had my bank's logo in the corner. Across the front in bold letters were the words, "Urgent response required." My heart began to pound. I opened it carefully. Inside was a notice about an attempted loan inquiry tied to my property. It said the bank had received documents requesting a large line of credit secured by my home. The request had been paused due to inconsistencies requiring verification. I read the sentence twice, then a third time. "I never applied for this," I said. Ava nodded. "I know." My mouth went dry. Nathan had asked about the house title. He had asked about Arthur's papers. He had asked about the workshop records. And now, someone had tried to borrow against my home. Grandma Ava said softly, "There's something else." She told me she had gone into the damaged workshop before Nathan arrived that morning. She had looked through the ash and broken shelves hoping to find Arthur's old notes. But the metal cash box was gone. The one Arthur kept locked beneath his workbench. Inside it had been several restoration ledgers, old appraisal documents, and copies of insurance records. It had survived because it was fireproof. And now it was missing. I stared at the charred violin case, resting beside the hotel bed. Suddenly, the empty pocket inside it did not feel like an accident. The missing cash box did not feel like an accident. The auction did not feel like an accident. Neither did the loan request. Nathan had not taken me to that hotel so I could rest. He had taken me away from my home so he could empty it. And as Ava held my hand in that small hotel room, I understood something I had spent days trying not to see. The fire had not only destroyed Arthur's workshop, it had opened the door for my son to take everything else. The next morning, I did not wait for Nathan to call. For the first time since the fire, I called him first. He answered on the third ring. "Mom," he said, sounding cheerful in a way that immediately made my stomach turn. "I was just about to call you. I want to go home." There was a pause. "Charlotte, the house still isn't ready. I want to see it. You shouldn't be there alone. I won't be alone. Ava is with me." Another pause. This one was longer. Then Nathan sighed. "Fine. But don't go into the workshop. The fire investigator said the area is unsafe." I know what the investigator said. "Mom, I'm serious. So am I." I ended the call before he could say anything else. Ava arrived 20 minutes later, wearing jeans, an old hooded sweatshirt, and the determined expression she had inherited from Arthur. She had borrowed her mother's car without asking for permission, though she told me she had left a note saying she was taking me home to pick up important things. I did not ask what her mother would think. At that moment, I was too tired of asking permission to see my own life. The drive back to my house felt longer than it had ever felt before. Every street looked familiar, but I watched them differently now. The pharmacy on the corner where Arthur used to buy peppermint candies. The elementary school where I had taught music for nearly 4 decades. The little diner where Nathan had taken me for Mother's Day when he was 12 and spent his own birthday money on a slice of pie for me. I kept thinking about that boy. Not the man who had taken my keys, not the man who had listed my belongings online. The boy. That was the hardest part. When a stranger hurts you, anger comes easily. But when it is your child, grief arrives first. It sits in your chest like a stone, and it makes you question your own memory. Had I missed something? Had I raised him wrong? Had I loved him too much, or not enough? By the time we turned onto my street, I had pushed those questions aside. There would be time for grief later. First, I needed the truth. Nathan's truck was not in the driveway. Neither was Brooke's car. The house looked quiet from the outside. Too quiet. The front porch still had a faint black stain along one corner from drifting smoke. My rose bushes were bent from the storm, their leaves hanging low and bruised. I stood at the curb for a moment, looking at the house Arthur and I had built our lives inside. Then Ava took my hand. "Come on, Grandma." The keys Nathan had taken from me were still missing, but I had hidden a spare years ago beneath a loose brick near the side gate. Arthur had laughed when I did it. "You planning to lock me out one day?" he had asked. "No," I told him. "I'm planning to make sure nobody locks me out." I found the key exactly where I had left it. The side door opened with a soft groan. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Smoke, damp carpet, cleaning chemicals. But beneath all of that was something else: absence. The house no longer felt lived in. It felt searched. Drawers stood open in the kitchen. The hallway closet had been emptied. A few framed photographs were stacked against the wall near the dining room, each marked with small colored stickers. Auction tags. I walked slowly through the living room. Arthur's chair was gone, not moved. Gone. The space near the window looked wrong without it. That worn brown recliner had been where he sat every evening with a cup of coffee and the local newspaper. The left armrest had a faint scratch from where he accidentally caught it with a screwdriver years ago. Now there was only an empty square in the carpet. I felt something inside me fold in on itself. Ava saw it too. "He sold it," she whispered. I nodded, but I could not speak. Then I turned toward the back door. "The workshop," I said. "Grandma, maybe we should wait for the investigator." No, I was not waiting anymore. The rain had stopped, but the yard remained soft and muddy. We walked carefully toward the workshop, stepping around charred boards and wet ash. The yellow caution tape had been pulled loose on one side. Someone had been inside. I knew it before I reached the door. The ruined workshop looked worse in daylight. One wall had collapsed inward. The workbench was buried beneath blackened wood. Arthur's tools lay scattered in the mud, some twisted beyond recognition. The old radio he listened to during football games was melted into something I could barely identify. I stood in the doorway, unable to take another step. Ava did. She slipped past me carefully. "I'll look," she said. "You stay near the entrance." I wanted to tell her no. I wanted to protect her from the ugliness of that place. But I had already spent too many days allowing other people to decide what I could handle. So I nodded. We moved, slowly speaking, only when necessary. Ava used a broken broom handle to push aside small pieces of ash-covered wood. I searched near the back wall where Arthur kept old files and supplies. The shelves had fallen, but one section remained partly upright beneath a beam. That was where I saw it, a corner of a leather-bound book. It was barely visible under a collapsed wooden crate. My heart jumped. "Ava," I said, "over here." She hurried to me. Together we worked the crate loose, inch by inch. It was heavy-soaked and blackened around the edges. My hands trembled from the effort, but neither of us stopped. Finally, the crate shifted. Underneath was a ledger. The cover was scorched and the pages along the edge were stained with water. But it had survived. Arthur's handwriting was on the front. Restoration records. I pressed the book against my chest. For one moment, I could almost feel him beside me. Then Ava pointed toward the workshop door. "Grandma," she said quietly. Near the doorframe, a muddy footprint crossed the ash. It was fresh. Someone had been there after the fire. Someone had searched this place. I opened the ledger with shaking fingers. The first pages were filled with familiar notes, names of old instruments, dates, repair costs, measurements, tiny sketches of bridges and tuning pegs. Arthur wrote the way he spoke carefully, patiently, as if each detail mattered because every object carried a story. Then Ava turned to a page near the middle. There, written in darker ink, was a heading, Charred Violin, 1906. My breath caught. Below it was a detailed description. Hand-carved maple back, original scroll, unusual inner varnish, distinctive repair beneath left shoulder, restored over 18 months. Arthur had written page after page about it. The violin had been found decades earlier in the estate of a retired concert musician outside Cleveland. It had been damaged, neglected, and nearly discarded. Arthur had purchased it for a small amount from someone who believed it was beyond repair. But Arthur had not believed that. He had restored it slowly, piece by piece. At the bottom of one page, I found a note underlined twice. "Do not sell without independent appraisal. Instrument may be rare Viscari model. Documentation and valuation information filed separately." My fingers went cold. "Ava," I whispered, "look at this." She leaned closer. Then we found another note written more recently. "If anything happens to me, contact Claire Morgan. She knows where the proper documents are kept." Claire Morgan, Arthur's attorney. I had heard that name before, of course. Claire had handled some paperwork after Arthur died, but I had not spoken to her in years. At the time, I assumed everything had been settled. I had no reason to think Arthur had left more behind. Until now. Ava carefully turned another page. A photograph slipped out. It was faded around the edges, but still clear enough to show the violin before the fire. The wood glowed amber beneath workshop light. Arthur held it across his lap with the kind of pride he usually reserved for Ava's school concerts. In the photograph, the violin scroll was visible. There was a small carved mark beneath it, almost like a tiny curved leaf. I looked down at the charred violin case I had brought from the hotel. I had carried it with me that morning without thinking. I had not wanted to leave it behind where Nathan or Brooke could touch it. I opened the case slowly. The violin was still blackened and damaged, but when I turned it carefully, I saw the same mark beneath the scroll. A tiny curved leaf, still there, still visible beneath the soot. Ava's eyes widened. That proves it's the same violin. Yes, I said. And suddenly every strange thing Nathan had done took on a new shape. The questions about Arthur's workshop records, the interest in the house title, the empty pocket inside the violin case, the missing metal cash box, the fire, the auction listing. Nathan had not just stumbled into a chance to sell old furniture. He knew there was something valuable hidden in Arthur's workshop. Maybe he did not know exactly what it was worth, but he knew enough to search for the records, enough to remove the papers, enough to want the violin gone before anyone else could look closely. I closed the ledger and held it tightly. For weeks, I had felt like a frightened old woman, being pushed from one room to another while everyone else made decisions over my head. But standing inside Arthur's burned workshop surrounded by ash and wreckage, something inside me began to change. Nathan thought he had taken everything that mattered. He thought the fire had erased the proof. He thought I was too tired, too heartbroken, too old to fight back. But Arthur had left me a way forward, and I was finally ready to use it. Claire Morgan's office was on the second floor of an old brick building downtown, across from the courthouse. I had been there once before, shortly after Arthur died. At the time, I was too numb to remember much. I recalled a woman with silver-streaked hair, a calm voice, and a box of tissues placed carefully within reach of every chair. 3 months later, when Ava and I stepped into that same office carrying Arthur's damaged ledger, Claire looked older than I remembered, but so did I. "Charlotte," she said softly, rising from behind her desk. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." "So do I." Ava sat beside me, holding the ledger against her chest. I placed the charred violin case gently on the small table between us. Claire looked at it for a long moment. "Arthur told me about that violin," she said. My eyes lifted to hers. "He did?" Claire nodded, more than once. I felt something tighten in my throat. Arthur had talked to me about music repairs and the children he hoped would someday learn in his workshop. But he had never told me he had spoken to his attorney about that violin. He was worried someone might misunderstand its importance, Claire continued. Or worse, try to sell it before it could be properly identified. Ava leaned forward. He knew it was valuable. Arthur suspected it was, Claire said. But he cared about more than money. He believed the instrument had history worth protecting. She opened a file drawer and removed a thick folder with Arthur's name written across the tab. Seeing his handwriting on the outside made my chest ache. Claire placed the folder on her desk and looked directly at me. "Before we discuss the violin," she said, "we need to discuss your house." I already knew something was wrong. Still, my hands began to shake. Claire pulled out several papers. "Your bank contacted my office yesterday," she said. "They received a request for a home equity line of credit secured by your property." Ava and I exchanged a look. "The letter," I said. "The one from the bank." Claire nodded. "The application was submitted under your name. It requested a large amount of money, but the bank flagged it because the signature on the documents did not match the signatures they had on record." My mouth went dry. "How much?" Claire paused before answering. $280,000. For a moment, I could not breathe. My house was not a number to me. It was where Arthur had proposed in the backyard after we finished repainting the porch. It was where Nathan learned to walk. It was where Ava first held a violin beneath her chin. But Nathan had looked at it and seen a way out of his own trouble, a way to borrow money against a home that did not belong to him. "I never signed anything," I said. "I know," Claire replied. "The signature is a forgery." The word sat between us. Forgery. Not confusion, not a misunderstanding, not a desperate mistake. Forgery. Ava's face went pale. "Can they prove it was Dad?" she asked. Claire folded her hands. "Not yet, but the documents were submitted through a company account linked to Nathan's renovation business. The bank has frozen the application while they investigate." I looked toward the window. Outside, people crossed the street carrying coffee cups and briefcases, moving through their ordinary lives. I wondered how the world could keep looking so normal when mine had quietly cracked apart. Claire continued, "There's more. Arthur updated his estate plan about 8 months before he passed away. I turned back to her. I thought everything was settled after he died. Most of it was. But Arthur made a few private arrangements that he asked me not to discuss unless certain circumstances occurred, like what Claire glanced at the blackened violin case, like a concern over the workshop, the violin, or any effort to pressure you into selling property before you were ready. A chill moved through me. Arthur had known something. Maybe not exactly what Nathan would do. Maybe not that there would be a fire, but he had seen enough to prepare. Claire pulled another document from the folder. The house is yours alone, Charlotte. Arthur transferred his interest in the property entirely to you through a survivorship deed years before his death. Nathan has no ownership claim, no authority to mortgage it, and no right to sell anything inside it without your written consent. I closed my eyes. For weeks, Nathan had spoken as though my home were already half his, as though I was only borrowing space until he decided what to do with it. But Arthur had made sure I was protected. Claire placed one more page in front of Ava. And this is an educational trust Arthur created for you. Ava stared at the paper. For me? Yes, Claire said. It is meant for music education lessons, instruments, college tuition, auditions, anything connected to your development as a musician. Ava looked at me stunned. I could see tears gathering in her eyes. Grandpa did that. He did, Claire said. He wanted you to have choices. He did not want money to be the reason you stopped playing. Ava covered her mouth with one hand. I reached for her other hand across the desk. Arthur had not just left behind a violin. He had left a path, and Nathan had tried to take it. Claire opened the restoration ledger Ava had found. This confirms what Arthur told me, she said. The violin may be a rare Vescari model from 1906. Arthur had been gathering documentation for an independent appraisal. He intended to speak with a specialist named William Bennett. William Bennett, I've repeated. Claire nodded. He is a respected restorer in the area. Arthur trusted his judgment. I thought of the blackened wood inside the case. It is damaged now. Yes, Claire said gently. But damage does not erase identity. And if the maker's marks and Arthur's records are intact, the violin may still be important, not only financially, but legally. Legally? Ava asked. Claire looked at us both. Because if Nathan knew the violin had value, or knew Arthur left documents identifying it, that gives us a possible motive for what has happened since the fire. My stomach twisted. The fire, the missing cash box, the auction listings, the loan documents. They were no longer separate pieces of a terrible week. They were a pattern. Claire reached for her phone. I contacted the auction company this morning, she said. They confirmed an estate auction has been scheduled at your house. My heart dropped. When? Saturday morning. Saturday, I whispered. That's 2 days from now. Claire nodded. Nathan submitted paperwork claiming you authorized the sale. I did not. I know. And I have already sent the company notice that the authorization is disputed. But they told me they may still proceed unless we obtain an emergency court order or direct proof that Nathan acted without permission. Ava sat up straighter. We have proof, she said. The bank letter, the auction website, the missing records, those are strong signs, Claire said. But we need to move carefully. If Nathan believes we are only making accusations, he may destroy what remains of the evidence. I thought of the muddy footprint inside the workshop, of the empty pocket in the violin case, of Nathan's strange relief when he saw the burned instrument. What do we do? I asked. Claire looked at me with the kind of steady seriousness that made me trust her. First, you stop signing or agreeing to anything Nathan puts in front of you. Second, you keep the violin and the ledger somewhere safe. Third, we document everything, every email, every auction listing, every conversation, every item missing from your home. And the auction? Claire's expression hardened. We prepare to stop it. For the first time since the fire, I felt something besides fear. It was small at first. A spark. A sense that I was no longer waiting helplessly in a hotel room, while my son decided what would happen to me. Arthur had not left me powerless. He had left me proof. He had left Ava a future. And Nathan, in his rush to take what did not belong to him, had made one mistake he never saw coming. He had assumed I would stay quiet. But as I looked down at the burned violin case between us, I understood the truth. Nathan did not just want my house. He wanted every piece of evidence that could expose him. The fire had not been only about destruction. The auction was not only about money. It was about making sure no one ever learned what Arthur had hidden and what Nathan had done to get it. The day before the auction, I asked Nathan to meet me at the house. I did not tell him that I had been to Claire Morgan's office. I did not tell him about the forged loan application, Arthur's trust for Ava, or the restoration ledger hidden beneath the ashes. Not yet. Claire had warned me that people who believed they were safe often made the biggest mistakes. She told me to listen carefully, to let Nathan speak, to write down every word afterward. So I called him that morning and said only one thing: we need to talk. He arrived just after lunch. Brooke came with him wearing a cream-colored coat and sunglasses, even though the sky was gray. Mason followed behind them, hands in his jacket pockets, looking bored before he had even stepped through the door. Ava was in the living room, sitting near the window, with Arthur's old ledger hidden safely inside her backpack. When Nathan saw me standing in the kitchen instead of sitting weakly in a hotel room, his expression tightened. "You shouldn't be here," he said. I almost smiled. "I own this house, Nathan. I can stand in my own kitchen whenever I please." Brooke set her purse on the counter. "Charlotte, nobody is trying to upset you," she said. "We just thought it would be easier if you rested until everything was sorted out." "Sorted out," I repeated. The words tasted bitter. Around us, the house looked stranger than it had the day before, more empty, more exposed. The dining room chairs were gone. The framed photograph of Arthur and me at our 25th anniversary party had been removed from the hallway wall, leaving a pale rectangle where it used to hang. Even my blue ceramic cookie jar was missing from the kitchen counter. I had never realized how much a home could be wounded without anyone breaking a single window. Nathan glanced toward the hallway. "The auction crew came by earlier," he said. "They're organizing the lots. It's all under control. I did not give them permission to organize anything." His eyes narrowed. "Mom, you agreed to this." "No, I did not." "Yes, you did." His voice remained calm, but the calmness felt sharp now. "You said you wanted help clearing out the house after the fire. You said you couldn't manage all of it alone. I said I needed help with smoke damage." I answered, "I never said I wanted my belongings sold." Brooke crossed her arms. "You were upset, Charlotte. You may not remember every conversation clearly." For a moment, the room went completely still. I looked at her. Then I looked at Nathan. And something inside me settled. It was not anger exactly. It was clarity. They were not trying to convince me anymore. They were trying to convince me that I could not trust my own mind. I remember very clearly I said, "I remember giving Nathan my keys. I remember being told I would stay at a hotel for 2 nights. I remember coming home and finding my husband's chair missing." Nathan's face flushed. "That chair was damaged." "No," I said. "You decided it was damaged. It smelled like smoke." "So did I. Did you plan to put me up for sale too?" Mason let out a short breath, almost a laugh. Ava turned toward him sharply, but I kept my eyes on Nathan. He looked tired now. Not sad, not ashamed, annoyed. "Mom," he said, lowering his voice, "you have no idea what kind of pressure I'm under." "There it is," I said. "What, the truth?" This was never about helping me. It was about helping yourself. Brooke's mouth tightened. Nathan stared at me for a long moment. Then he pulled a chair back from the table and sat down. "Fine," he said. "You want the truth?" My company is in trouble. I have employees. I have bills. I have contracts that could collapse if I don't get through the next few weeks. You asked me for money, I said. I said no. I asked you for help. You asked me to risk my home. Nathan leaned forward. You have a house worth almost $400,000. You have things in that workshop you don't even understand. Dad spent years collecting instruments, papers, records, things you never cared enough to learn about. His words hit me harder than I expected, because they were cruel. Not loud, not dramatic, just cruel. Arthur's workshop had been part of our marriage. I may not have known every measurement of every piece of wood, but I knew the way Arthur's face softened when a damaged instrument made its first clear note again. I knew the names of his favorite tools. I knew where he kept the extra strings. I knew what he meant when he said something had a voice. Nathan knew none of those things, but he thought money gave him the right to claim them. You are wrong, I said quietly. I cared about every piece of that workshop because I cared about your father. Nathan looked away. For the first time, something flickered across his face. Maybe guilt, maybe memory, but it disappeared quickly. You're not thinking logically, he said. You're thinking emotionally. I am thinking like the woman whose life you tried to take apart while she was grieving. Brooke stepped closer to Nathan. No one is taking anything from you, she said. We are trying to save this family from a financial disaster. By putting me in one? You have no idea what it's like to worry about making payroll. Nathan snapped. His voice rose for the first time. Ava flinched in the living room. I saw it. Nathan saw it too, but he did not apologize. Instead, he rubbed a hand over his face and looked at me as though I were the reason he had been pushed this far. You're letting Ava poison you against us, he said. Ava stood up. I am not poisoning anyone, she said. Nathan turned toward her. You're 16. You don't understand adult problems. No, Ava replied. But I understand stealing. Brooke gasped softly. Mason stepped forward, then finally lifting his eyes from his phone. Can everybody calm down, he said. This is getting ridiculous. I looked at him. Mason, your father has been selling things from my house. He's trying to fix the situation, Mason said. You're acting like he robbed a bank. I never gave him permission. Mason shrugged. You're not going to use all this stuff anyway. The sentence sounded so familiar, so empty, so careless. I felt my chest tighten. Your grandfather's chair was not stuff, I said. Your great-grandmother's bowl was not stuff, and that violin was not stuff. Mason glanced toward the black violin case resting on the kitchen table. The charred case had become like a shadow beside me. He rolled his eyes. Grandma, that thing is a pile of burned wood. Ava turned toward him so fast that her backpack slipped from her shoulder. Don't say that, she whispered. Mason looked uncomfortable for only a second. Then he doubled down. It's true. Nobody wants it. Nobody cares. I could see Ava's face change, not into anger, into hurt. The kind of hurt that comes when someone you grew up with becomes a stranger right in front of you. She and Mason had once built blanket forts in my living room. They had fought over the last cookie. They had sat together on Arthur's workbench, listening to him explain how a violin could be repaired. Now Mason looked at that same history like it embarrassed him. Nathan stood. The auction is tomorrow, he said flatly. It's happening. You can either cooperate and let this be handled respectfully, or you can make a scene in front of strangers. I stared at him. A scene? Yes, he said. You can make everyone think I'm some villain, or you can accept that we're doing what needs to be done. I felt something rise inside me. Not fear, not grief. Strength. You do not get to decide what needs to be done with my life, I said. Nathan's jaw tightened. For a second, I thought he might say something worse. Instead, he grabbed his coat. Fine, he said. Be at the house tomorrow morning if you want, but don't say I didn't try to help you. Brooke picked up her purse without looking at me. Mason hesitated near the doorway. His eyes went briefly to the violin case. Then he followed his parents out. The front door closed behind them. For several seconds, neither Ava nor I spoke. The silence in the house felt enormous. Finally, Ava came into the kitchen and sat beside me. Her eyes were wet, but she was trying not to cry. I'm sorry, she said. I don't know what happened to Mason. I reached for her hand. Sometimes people lose themselves when they are too afraid to stand up to the wrong person. Ava looked down at her backpack. Then she unzipped the front pocket. "There's something I need to show you," she said. She took out her phone. "Yesterday, when I was at Dad's house, Mason left his phone on the kitchen counter. It kept buzzing. I thought it was one of his friends, but I saw a voice message from Dad. My pulse quickened. Did you listen to it?" Ava nodded slowly. "I saved it." She held the phone tightly in both hands. "I don't think Dad knows Mason kept it, and I don't think Mason realizes how important it is." I looked at the screen. "What did Nathan say?" Ava swallowed. "I don't want to play it here," she whispered. "Not yet. But Grandma..." It proves he knew about the workshop records. For the first time, I felt the fear in my chest begin to loosen. Nathan believed tomorrow would be the day he sold my memories to strangers. He believed he would stand in my home and decide what was worthless. But he had no idea that Ava had been listening. And before the auction began, I knew one thing for certain. I was not walking into that house as a helpless old woman. I was walking in with the truth. The auction began at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning. I knew that because at 8:57, I stood across the street from my own house and watched a man carry my mother's china cabinet down the front steps as if it were nothing more than an empty wooden box. The sky above Columbus was pale and cold, the kind of gray morning that made everything look drained of color. A row of cars lined both sides of the street. People I had never seen before moved in and out of my front door, carrying coffee cups, tote bags, and small numbered paddles. Some of them looked excited. Others looked curious. A few looked like they had come simply because they enjoyed hunting for bargains. None of them knew what they were walking through. They did not know that the blue vase on the mantel had held the roses Arthur brought me after my first year as a teacher. They did not know that the brass lamp in the living room had been on every night when Nathan was a child and afraid of the dark. They did not know the worn quilt folded over the sofa was stitched by my grandmother's hands. To them, everything inside that house had a price. To me, every piece had a heartbeat. Ava stood beside me. Her hands curled into fists inside the pockets of her navy coat. Claire Morgan was on my other side carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the same composed expression she had worn in her office. I was grateful for that expression. It reminded me not to tremble. "Are you ready?" Claire asked. "No." That was the honest answer. I was not ready to watch strangers walk through my life. I was not ready to see Nathan standing inside my home pretending to be the grieving son while he sold everything he could get his hands on. But I had spent too many days being afraid of what I would see, so I lifted my chin. "I am." We crossed the street. The closer I got, the more I noticed what had changed. A large white sign stood near the porch with the auction company's name printed across it. Bright orange tags had been tied to furniture picture frames, dishes, lamps, even the old wooden clock above the kitchen doorway. My house had become a showroom. The front door was open. I stepped inside. For 1 second, the noise hit me so hard that I could barely breathe. Voices, footsteps, laughter, the scrape of shoes across my hardwood floors. A woman was opening the drawers of my buffet cabinet. A man in a baseball cap was inspecting the silverware Arthur and I received as a wedding gift. 2 teenagers stood near the fireplace, whispering and pointing at framed family photographs as if they were props from a movie set. I felt something deep inside me twist. Ava noticed. She moved closer, her shoulder brushing mine. "Don't let them see you break," she whispered. I looked at her, then I nodded. At the far end of the living room, Nathan stood beside Brooke. He wore a dark sweater and a sad, polite expression. Brooke had her hair styled perfectly, her makeup flawless, and a small tissue tucked between her fingers. They looked like people in mourning. They looked like a family forced into a painful decision. And for a moment, I understood how easily strangers could believe them. Nathan saw me first. His eyes widened. Then his face settled into a smile so thin it barely existed. "Mom," he said, walking toward me. "I didn't think you'd actually come. I told you I would." He glanced at Claire. "Who's this?" "My attorney," I said. Brooke's smile disappeared for half a second. Then she recovered. "Oh," she said lightly. "Well, that seems a little dramatic." Claire did not smile. "My name is Claire Morgan," she said. "I represent Charlotte Harris." Nathan's jaw tightened. A small crowd continued moving around us, but I noticed a few people slowing down. They could sense tension, even if they did not understand it. Nathan leaned closer to me and lowered his voice. "You're making this worse." "No," I said. "You did that when you started selling my things." His eyes darkened. "Mom, we talked about this." "No, you talked. I was expected to listen." Brooke stepped in quickly. "Charlotte, please. There are people here. We can discuss this privately." I looked around the room, at the strangers touching my belongings, at the orange tags tied to the furniture Arthur and I had chosen together, at the empty space where his chair had once sat. "You made it public the moment you opened my front door," I said. For the first time, Brooke looked nervous. Nathan exhaled sharply through his nose. "The sale has already started," he said. "Even if you don't like it, it's too late now." Claire opened her briefcase. "We'll see about that," she said. Nathan's gaze dropped to the papers in her hand. I watched his face carefully. There it was again. That flash of fear. Quick, controlled, but real. Before Claire could speak, a man with a microphone stepped into the foyer. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "we'll begin the next group of lots in 10 minutes. Please make your way toward the back patio and workshop area." The crowd began shifting. People turned toward the hallway. Some carried small items they had already claimed. Others checked numbers on printed sheets. Nathan looked relieved. The movement gave him an excuse to step away from us. "Come on," he said to Brooke. "We have work to do." Then he turned and walked toward the back of the house. Brooke followed. For a moment, Mason stood near the stairs watching us. He wore a gray hoodie and looked pale beneath the fluorescent light. He did not meet my eyes at first. Instead, he stared at the floor. "Mason," I said quietly. He looked up. His face was guarded. "Hi, Grandma. Is this really what you want?" He swallowed. I saw something in his expression shift. Not kindness exactly. Maybe shame. But then, Nathan called his name from the hallway. "Mason, bring the last lot." Mason's shoulders stiffened. He looked toward his father's, then back at me. "I don't know what you expect me to do," he muttered. "I expect you to know right from wrong." His mouth tightened. Then he turned away. Ava watched him go. "He knows," she whispered. "He just doesn't want to admit it." We followed the crowd toward the back patio. The patio doors were open despite the cold, and the auction company had set up a small platform under a canopy in the yard. The burned shell of Arthur's workshop stood beyond it, blocked off with yellow tape. Seeing it again made my chest ache. The blackened beams, the broken roofline, the empty window frames. It looked less like a building now, and more like a warning. The auctioneer stood at the front with a microphone in one hand and a clipboard in the other. He was a broad man in a tan coat, probably in his 50s, with the smooth voice of someone who had spent years turning other people's belongings into numbers. A few lots were sold before I could fully understand what was happening. Arthur's old tool chest went for $120. A collection of framed paintings went for $85. The wooden dining table where my family had eaten Thanksgiving dinner for 20 years went for $210. Each time the auctioneer called out a final bid, someone clapped. I stood there silently, feeling as though pieces of me were being carried away in boxes. Then Nathan stepped toward the canopy. He nodded at Mason. Mason disappeared into the house and returned a moment later, holding the black violin case. My breath caught. The case looked even worse in daylight. The leather was blistered and cracked, its edges dark with soot. Mason carried it by one handle, letting it swing carelessly beside his leg. Ava moved closer to me. Nathan stood near the auctioneer and spoke in a low voice. I could not hear every word, but I heard enough. Last item, fire damaged, not worth much. Then Mason stepped onto the small platform. He held up the case. Guess this is the big finale, he said loud enough for the crowd to hear. A few people laughed. My heart sank. Mason opened the case. The charred violin lay inside, dark and twisted, its strings hanging loose. He lifted it by the neck. Not gently. Not the way Arthur would have. He held it up like something filthy. Grandma's old burned violin, he said. Probably not worth $40. A few people chuckled again. I felt my face grow hot. Not because of the violin, because of him. Because my grandson, Arthur's grandson, was standing in front of strangers and humiliating the one thing Arthur had believed should be protected. I looked at Nathan. He did not laugh. But he did not stop Mason either. And that told me everything. Then, from the edge of the crowd, a new voice spoke. May I see that instrument? Everyone turned. An older man stood near the patio gate, wearing a dark wool coat and holding a folded auction brochure. His hair was silver, his glasses thin, and his eyes were fixed not on Mason, not on Nathan, but on the violin. Nathan's expression changed. The man stepped forward slowly. I'm William Bennett, he said. I restore string instruments, and I would like a closer look at that scroll. The auctioneer frowned. Mason lowered the violin slightly. Nathan moved fast. It's just burned junk, he said. There's nothing to see. But William Bennett did not look away. His eyes stayed on the violin, on the blackened wood, on the carved curve beneath the scroll. And as he took one more step forward, the entire yard seemed to grow quieter. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The wind pressed against the canopy overhead. Somewhere near the driveway, a car door slammed. But inside that small crowd, gathered around my back patio, every eye had turned toward William Bennett. Nathan's face had gone still. Not angry. Not yet. Still. The kind of stillness that comes when someone hears a sound they were never supposed to hear. William stepped closer to the platform, his gaze fixed on the violin in Mason's hand. I only need a moment, he said calmly. Please don't touch the scroll. Mason gave a small laugh. It's burned. William did not look at him. I can see that. The auctioneer glanced at Nathan, then at the small audience gathering closer around the canopy. Sir, he said, if you're interested in bidding, you'll have the opportunity once the lot opens. I am not asking to bid, William replied. I'm asking to inspect an instrument before it is described as worthless. That word seemed to settle heavily over the crowd. Worthless. Mason had said it with a smile. Nathan had encouraged it with his silence. And now a stranger had repeated it, as if he were questioning whether it had ever been true. Nathan stepped forward. There's really no need, he said. It was in a fire. The case is ruined. The wood is warped. We're selling it as damaged property. William finally looked at him. His eyes were calm, but there was something firm behind them. Then you should want an expert opinion before you sell it. Nathan's mouth tightened. I watched him carefully. For days I had wondered if I was imagining things. If grief had made me suspicious. If I had turned every awkward moment into evidence because I was afraid of what I might find. But Nathan's face told me I had not imagined anything. He was afraid. Ava stepped forward beside me. Can I see it? She asked. Mason looked at her with open disbelief. What? The violin, Ava said. Can I hold it? He glanced at Nathan. Nathan did not answer immediately. That was when Claire moved closer to me, her leather briefcase still in one hand. You don't have to ask them for permission, she murmured. But Ava had already stepped toward the platform. The auctioneer hesitated. This is a live sale, he said. I can't have people handling the lots. It was my grandfather's violin, Ava said quietly. And it belongs to my grandmother. The auctioneer looked uncomfortable. Several people in the crowd had started whispering. I could hear small pieces of conversation around me. Is there a dispute? Did she authorize this sale? That lawyer looked serious. Nathan heard it too. He turned toward the auctioneer, his voice low but sharp. Just keep this moving. Ava looked at him. For the first time that morning, she did not look frightened. She looked steady. 5 minutes, she said. That's all I'm asking. Mason snorted. What are you going to do? Play it? Ava's eyes did not leave the violin. Yes, she said. A few people laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly enough to fill the yard. But enough. Enough for me to feel the old pain rise in my chest. Mason laughed too. You can't play that thing, he said. It barely has strings. Ava turned toward him. I don't need it to be perfect. Something changed in her voice then. It was not anger, it was sadness. The kind of sadness that comes when someone you love has chosen to become cruel. You used to sit in Grandpa's workshop with me, she said. Used to ask him why every violin sounded different. Mason's smile faded. For a moment, his face looked younger, like the little boy who had once followed Arthur around with sawdust on his shoes. Then Nathan spoke. Mason handed it to the auctioneer. The moment broke. Mason looked at his father, then at Ava, and slowly, almost reluctantly, he lowered the violin. But before the auctioneer could take it, William Bennett stepped forward. I'll support the request, he said. 5 minutes, under supervision. The auctioneer looked from William to Nathan, then to Claire. Finally, he sighed. 5 minutes, he said. No bidding until then. Ava reached up. Mason hesitated. His fingers tightened around the neck of the violin. Then he placed it in her hands. I stopped breathing, even burned, even scarred. The instrument looked different when Ava held it. Not because the soot vanished, not because the cracks disappeared, but because she held it the way Arthur used to. With care, with respect, as though it was still alive. Ava stepped down from the platform and moved to a small folding table near the patio wall. William stood beside her watching closely. Claire came to stand near me. Nathan remained near the auctioneer, rigid and pale. Ava opened the ruined case and laid the violin carefully on a clean handkerchief she had taken from her coat pocket. That small detail broke something inside me. She had come prepared. She had known this moment might happen. She had known Mason might humiliate the violin, and she had brought a handkerchief because she refused to let Arthur's instrument rest on a dirty table. William bent over the violin. May I, he asked. Ava nodded. He did not touch it at first. He only studied it. The scroll, the curves of the body, the blackened varnish, the narrow line beneath the left shoulder where Arthur had once repaired the wood. Then William leaned closer. His expression changed. It was subtle, a tightening around his eyes, a small pause in his breathing. Nathan saw it too. What Nathan asked quickly. William did not answer. Instead, he looked at Ava. Can you show me the back? Ava carefully turned the violin over. The crowd pressed closer. I could feel it. The shift in attention. The sudden sense that this was no longer simply a sad old woman's burned property being sold at auction. This was something else. William took off his glasses, wiped them with a cloth, and put them back on. Then he touched the edge of the scroll with one finger. There, he said softly. Ava looked where he pointed. The tiny curved leaf mark beneath the scroll was still visible, darkened by smoke, but untouched by the fire. The same mark I had seen in Arthur's photograph. William's face became very still. Mr. Bennett, the auctioneer asked. What are you seeing? William did not look away from the violin. I'm seeing a maker's mark, he said. One that should not be on an instrument described as worthless. Nathan's voice rose. This is ridiculous. It's fire damaged. You can't tell anything from that. William turned slowly toward him. I can tell quite a lot. The crowd went silent. Even Mason stopped moving. Ava looked down at the violin, her lips pressed together, as if she were holding back tears. William reached into his coat pocket and removed a small toolkit. Inside was a tuning fork, a soft cloth, and a few simple supplies. I would not normally recommend tuning an instrument in this condition, he said, but I believe it may be stable enough for one short test. Nathan stepped forward again. Oh, the word came out too fast, too sharp. Every person in the crowd heard it. William looked at him. Why not? Nathan's eyes moved from William to Ava to the violin. Because it's damaged, he said. It could break. Ava lifted her head. It already survived a fire, she said quietly. I felt tears sting my eyes. William studied the violin one last time, then looked at Ava. Do you know how to tune it gently? Ava nodded. Grandpa taught me. Then do exactly what he taught you. She sat on the edge of a folding chair. The violin rested beneath her chin. For a moment, she closed her eyes. Then she began. The first string gave a rough, wounded sound. A few people shifted uncomfortably. A second adjustment brought a faint note into focus. Ava moved slowly, carefully, making the smallest changes with her fingertips. She did not force the pegs. She did not rush. She listened after every turn. The yard had become so quiet that I could hear the rainwater dripping from the damaged workshop roof behind us. Then Ava lifted the bow. The first note came out thin, fragile, almost broken. But it was a note, a real note. And then she played another. The melody was one Arthur used to hum while he worked a simple old tune he had taught Ava when she was small. It was not flashy. It was not complicated. But it was ours. Ava played slowly. The sound trembled in places. The burned wood gave the music a rough edge, as if the violin had a scar in its voice, yet somehow that made it more beautiful. Every note carried grief. Every note carried memory. Every note seemed to say that what had been damaged was not gone. I looked around. The woman who had been opening my buffet drawers stood with her hand over her mouth. The man in the baseball cap had lowered his bidding paddle. Even the auctioneer stood completely still. Mason stared at Ava as if he had never seen her before. And Nathan looked like someone had pulled the ground out from under him. Ava finished the melody with one final soft note. It lingered in the cold air, then faded. No one spoke. For several long seconds, the entire yard was silent. William Bennett stepped forward, his eyes shining behind his glasses. He looked at the violin, then at me. Mrs. Harris, he said, this is not junk. Nathan swallowed hard. William turned toward the crowd. This appears to be a 1906 Vascari violin. Rare, historically significant, and even with the fire damage. He paused, looking again at the instrument in Ava's hands. It may be worth far more than anyone here understands. A murmur moved through the crowd. $40. That was what Mason had said it was worth. $40. But now, all at once, nobody was laughing. For several seconds after William Bennett spoke, the only sound in my backyard was the faint creak of the canopy above us. Then the whispers began. Not the careless kind I had heard when people were touching my photographs and opening my drawers. These whispers had changed. Now they carried surprise, suspicion. Somewhere behind me, a woman said, "Did he say 1906? A man answered, "A Vascari. Those are worth a fortune." Nathan heard every word. I saw it in the way his shoulders stiffened. His eyes moved rapidly around the yard from William to the violin in Ava's hands, then to Claire standing beside me with her briefcase. He looked like a man trying to find the nearest exit without moving his feet. That doesn't prove anything, Nathan said. His voice was louder than it needed to be. William turned toward him slowly. "No," he replied. "It proves the instrument deserves a proper appraisal before anyone sells it for $40. Nathan gave a sharp laugh. "You're acting like it belongs in a museum." "It was in a fire. It's damaged." William did not raise his voice. Damage affects value. It does not erase provenance. The auctioneer looked uncomfortable now. He held his clipboard against his chest, scanning the crowd as if hoping someone else would solve the problem for him. "Mr. Harris," he said cautiously, "you represented this item as fire-damaged household property. You did not indicate that it might be a rare instrument." Nathan turned on him. "Because I didn't know." That was the first lie he told that morning, which I heard with absolute certainty. Not because I had a document in my hand, not because Claire had explained the legal details, but because I had watched my son's face when Ava lifted that bow. He had known enough to be afraid. Claire stepped forward before Nathan could say another word. "Actually," she said, opening her briefcase, "there are several things Mr. Harris failed to disclose." The crowd fell quieter. Nathan's eyes locked on the papers in her hand. I felt a strange calm settle over me. For days I had been shaking inside. I had questioned myself. I had wondered whether I was really becoming the confused old woman Nathan and Brooke wanted everyone to believe I was. But now I stood in my own backyard, surrounded by the people who had come to buy pieces of my life, and I did not feel confused at all. I felt awake. Claire removed a thick document from her briefcase. "My name is Claire Morgan," she said, speaking clearly enough for the auctioneer and everyone nearby to hear. "I am the attorney for Charlotte Harris, the sole owner of this residence, and the personal property being offered for sale today." The auctioneer blinked. Nathan stepped closer. "This is a family matter," he said through clenched teeth. Claire looked at him. "No. It is a legal matter." A murmur passed through the crowd. Brooke, who had been standing near the patio door with a frozen smile on her face, took one step backward. Claire continued, "Mr. Harris submitted paperwork claiming that Charlotte Harris authorized this estate sale. That claim is disputed. My client did not authorize the sale of her belongings, did not approve the removal of her household items, and did not grant Nathan Harris permission to sell any item from this property." The auctioneer's face turned pale. He looked down at his clipboard. "I was given signed authorization," he said. Claire nodded once. "And we are investigating the validity of that document." Nathan's face reddened. "You can't just walk in here and accuse me of forgery." "No," Claire said. "But the bank can." The crowd shifted again. Even people who had been standing near the driveway started moving closer. Nathan looked at me then, really looked at me. His expression was no longer angry. It was frightened. Claire lifted another paper. 2 days ago, a loan application was submitted under Charlotte Harris's name, seeking a home equity line of credit secured by this property. The signature was flagged by the bank because it did not match Mrs. Harris's verified signature. Someone in the crowd gasped. Brooke's hand flew to her mouth. Nathan turned toward her so quickly that I almost missed it. Just one glance. But it told me he had not told her everything. I didn't submit that, he snapped. Claire did not react. The application was submitted through an account connected to your renovation business. That doesn't mean I did it. No, Claire said. It means the bank has opened an investigation. Nathan's jaw clenched. Mason stood near the edge of the canopy, his gray hoodie pulled tight around him. He had stopped looking bored. His face had gone pale and his eyes kept darting between his father and the violin in Ava's hands. I wondered what he was thinking. I wondered whether he was finally beginning to understand that lies did not stay small just because you whispered them. William stepped toward me then. His voice lowered, but it was still firm. "Mrs. Harris, I knew your husband." I turned to him. "You knew Arthur." "Not well," he said, "but well enough to recognize his work." My throat tightened. William looked at the violin. "Arthur called me about this instrument. Almost 2 years before he passed," he said. He had questions about the scroll, the varnish, and a repair beneath the shoulder. He suspected it was a Vascari, but he wanted an independent opinion before he made any claims. Nathan's eyes flashed. "You never told me that," he said. William looked at him. "Your father asked me not to discuss it with anyone until he was ready." The words struck Nathan harder than I expected. For a moment, his face twisted, not with grief, with resentment. It was painful to see. Arthur had been dead for 5 years, And somehow Nathan still seemed angry that his father had left something beyond his control. William continued, "Your father cared deeply about this violin. He said he hoped it would one day be played by someone who understood that its value was more than money." Ava lowered her eyes. Her fingers were still wrapped around the burned violin. I reached for her free hand. She held mine tightly. Nathan let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, please. Now we're turning this into some grand family legend." "No," I said. Everyone looked at me. My voice came out soft, but it did not shake. "You turned it into a bargain bin joke." Nathan stared at me. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about." I took one step forward. For the first time in days, I did not feel like I had to defend myself. I did not feel like I had to prove I was sane, capable, or worthy of being heard. I simply spoke. "You came into my home with folders and brochures. You asked about my house title. You asked about Arthur's workshop records. Then a fire destroyed that workshop. Then you took my keys, sent me to a hotel, and listed my belongings for auction without my consent." Nathan's face went hard. "You're making connections that aren't there." "Am I?" He looked away. That was answer enough. Claire turned to the auctioneer. "On behalf of my client, I am formally demanding that this auction stop immediately." The auctioneer swallowed. He looked at Nathan, then at me, then at the people standing around us, all of them silent now. "I'm going to need to pause the sale," he said carefully, "until this is sorted out." Nathan stepped toward him. "You can't do that. People have already bought things. I can hold the items," the auctioneer said, "but I am not moving forward with a disputed estate sale. You're making a huge mistake." The auctioneer's expression stiffened. "I believe the mistake may have happened before I got here." That was when Nathan lost control. His face darkened. He pointed toward me. "This is unbelievable. She's angry because she doesn't want to accept reality. She can't manage this house. She can't manage the bills. She can't manage anything without help." Brooke whispered his name. "Nathan." But he did not stop. "She thinks I'm trying to hurt her because she doesn't understand what it takes to keep a family afloat. I was trying to save my business. I was trying to save all of us." "You were trying to save yourself," I said. Nathan turned toward me. "And what do you know about pressure?" The question hit me, but it did not break me. I thought about the years I worked 2 jobs when he was small. The mornings I packed lunches before sunrise. The nights I sat beside him when he was sick. The times Arthur and I skipped buying new clothes so Nathan could join school trips, take music lessons, or play baseball. I knew pressure. I knew sacrifice. What I did not know was betrayal. Not until my own son taught me. "You have no right to talk to her like that," Ava said. Nathan spun toward her. "And you need to stay out of this." Ava's hand moved to her coat pocket. "No," she said. "I don't." Mason looked at her sharply. "Ava," he whispered. But she had already taken out her phone. For the first time that morning, Nathan's color drained completely. Ava looked at me before she pressed the screen. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Then she hit play. At first, all we heard was static, a muffled sound. Then, Nathan's voice. Sharp, low, unmistakable. "Mason, get the restoration ledgers out of that workshop before the old woman starts asking questions." The yard went silent. Every single person heard it. Nathan closed his eyes. For one brief second, he looked less like my son and more like a stranger standing in his place. Ava stopped the recording. Mason had not moved. He stood beneath the canopy with his hands hanging at his sides, his face white with fear. Nathan turned slowly toward him. "Ordam abdudum eminhimam." "Mason," he said. It was not loud. That made it worse. Mason looked at his father, then at me. And in that long, terrible moment, I did not know which one he would choose. For a moment, Mason did not say anything. He stood beneath the canopy, with rain-dark clouds above him and the remains of Arthur's workshop behind him, staring at his father As if he had never truly seen him before, Nathan's voice was low. "Mason," he said again. It was not a warning spoken loudly. It was worse. It was the kind of voice a parent used when they expected obedience without question. Mason swallowed hard. His hands were trembling now. Ava stood beside me, still holding her phone. The burned violin rested carefully in her other arm, pressed close to her coat, as though she was protecting something fragile and alive. Nathan took one step toward Mason. "You know that recording means nothing," he said. "You don't understand the context." Mason's eyes flicked toward me, then to Ava, then back to Nathan. "I understand it," he whispered. The words were so quiet that I almost missed them. Nathan's face changed. "What did you say?" Mason looked down at the muddy ground. "I said I understand it." The crowd had stopped pretending not to listen. No one was looking at furniture anymore. No one was holding up bidding paddles. The auction had become something else entirely. It had become a family breaking apart in public. Brooke stood near the patio door, one hand pressed against her chest. Her face had lost all color. "Mason," she said softly, "you don't have to say anything right now." But Mason did. Maybe because he had been carrying too much for too long. Maybe because the truth had finally become heavier than the fear. "I thought the fire was an accident," he said. Nathan took another step forward. "Mason." "I did?" Mason repeated louder this time. "Dad told me it was an accident." I felt my breath catch. Mason wiped at his face with the sleeve of his hoodie. He said something caught fire in the workshop. He said Grandma would be upset, but it would all work out because insurance would cover everything. Nathan shook his head. "That is not what happened." Mason looked at him. "Yes, it is." The silence around us became unbearable. "I saw you that night." Mason continued. "Before the fire, I was coming back from Tyler's house. I cut through the alley because it was raining." Nathan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Mason's eyes filled with tears. "You were behind Grandma's house," he said. "You had a red gas can in your hand." Brooke made a small choking sound. Nathan turned toward her sharply. "Don't start," he snapped. Brooke stepped backward as if he had struck her. I stared at Nathan. My son, the boy who once cried when he accidentally stepped on a bird's wing. The man who had stood in my yard after the fire and told me to throw Arthur's violin away. Mason continued speaking, and each word felt like another piece of my heart breaking. "I asked you what you were doing," he said. "You told me to get in the truck and keep my mouth shut." Nathan's eyes burned with anger. "You are confused." "No, I'm not. You were upset. You had been drinking with your friends. I had one soda." Mason said, his voice cracking. "You know I didn't drink." Nathan looked around at the people watching, then at Claire, then at the auctioneer. For the first time, panic flickered openly across his face. "You're all going to believe a teenager over me," he demanded. "A kid who doesn't know what he saw? I know what I saw." Mason said. The words came out stronger now. "I saw you carrying the gas can. I saw you go toward the workshop. And after the fire, you told me not to tell anyone because Grandma would blame you for something you didn't do." My knees weakened. Claire reached for my elbow, steadying me without making a scene. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask Nathan why. Why the workshop? Why Arthur's things? Why my home? Why me? But the questions felt too large to fit into words. Nathan pointed at Mason. "You're lying because Ava got in your head." Ava's face tightened. "No," she said. "He's telling the truth because you finally ran out of ways to scare him." Nathan turned toward her. "You don't know anything about this family." Ava stared at him. "I know Grandpa loved us," she said, "and I know you used that love against Grandma." The words landed hard. Nathan looked at Brooke as if he expected her to defend him. But Brooke did not. She was crying quietly now, mascara gathering beneath her eyes. "You told me the fire was electrical," she said. Nathan's jaw tightened. Brooke, not now. You told me it was a bad wire, she repeated louder. You told me the workshop was old and unsafe. He looked away. Brooke shook her head slowly. You told me you were only selling some things because Charlotte wanted to downsize. No one spoke. Then Nathan snapped. You knew the business was failing. Brooke froze. Nathan's voice rose. You knew we were drowning. You knew about the loans. You knew the bills were coming in. And you stood there every night asking me what I was going to do. Brooke stared at him in disbelief. I asked you to talk to your mother, she said. I did not ask you to burn down her workshop. Nathan laughed once bitterly. Oh, please. You wanted that house sold just as much as I did. Brooke's face collapsed. I had spent years wondering whether Brooke's coldness came from cruelty or insecurity. In that moment, I saw something different. She had been selfish. She had been willing to let Nathan pressure me, but even she had not known how far he was willing to go. Nathan turned toward me again. His eyes were wild now. You don't understand what I had to do, he said. I looked at him. I could barely recognize the man standing in front of me. What did you have to do? I asked quietly. He took a breath. My company was failing. I had payroll. I had people depending on me. I had debts I couldn't pay. So you burned your father's workshop. I didn't mean for it to get that bad. The moment the words left his mouth, he seemed to realize what he had done. The crowd reacted all at once. A gasp. A sharp intake of breath. The auctioneer stepped back. Claire's eyes narrowed. Nathan stared at the ground, breathing hard. Then he tried to recover. I mean, if something happened, it wasn't supposed to. Stop, I said. My voice was soft, but it cut through everything. Nathan looked at me. For the first time in his life, I did not see my little boy in his face. I saw a grown man who had made choices, terrible, selfish choices. And now he wanted everyone else to carry the blame for them. You did not have to do any of this, I said. You could have told me the truth. You could have asked for help without lying. You could have gone to the bank, sold your truck, closed your business, taken another job. You had choices. His eyes filled with anger. You think it's that simple? No, I said. I think honesty is hard, but it is still a choice. Mason began crying then, not loudly, not the way children cry when they are hurt, the way someone cries when they finally understand they helped hurt someone else. I'm sorry, Grandma, he whispered. I looked at him. His face was wet. His shoulders were shaking. He looked 18 again, not grown, not tough, not embarrassed by my house, just young, just lost. I'm sorry I called it worthless, he said. I'm sorry I helped Dad. He told me it was only temporary. He told me we were going to fix everything. My throat tightened. I wanted to reach for him. I wanted to tell him it would be okay. But I could not lie to him, not after everything that had happened. Mason, I said gently, I love you. He looked up. But being sorry does not erase what you did. His face crumpled. You stood there while your father took things from me. I continued. You let him use you to make me feel small. You laughed at something your grandfather treasured. I know. You will have to live differently now, I said. Not just feel bad. Different. Mason nodded slowly. I will. Claire stepped away from my side and pulled out her phone. I'm calling Investigator Dalton, she said. Nathan looked at her. You can't do this. Claire's expression was calm. I can, and I am. She walked a few steps away, speaking quietly into the phone. I watched Nathan as he stood in the yard surrounded by strangers who now knew exactly what he had tried to hide. The auction he had planned to use to humiliate me had become the place where every lie began collapsing. The people who had come looking for bargains were now watching a man unravel under the weight of his own greed. Within 20 minutes, Mark Dalton arrived with another investigator. He walked through the side gate wearing a dark jacket, his expression serious. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. But when he looked at Nathan, I could see that he already understood the situation had changed. Claire spoke with him first. Ava handed over her phone. Mason gave his statement in a shaking voice, while Brooke stood apart, silent and pale. Mark listened to all of it. Then he approached Nathan. "We need to reopen the investigation into the fire," he said. Nathan folded his arms. "I want a lawyer." Mark nodded. "That is your right." Nathan looked at me one last time. There was anger in his face, but beneath it, I saw something else. Fear. Not fear of losing money. Not fear of losing the house. Fear of being seen. And as he stood there in the yard behind the home he had tried to take from me, I realized something I never expected. The most painful part was not that Nathan had betrayed me. It was that he had believed I would never have the strength to survive it. The weeks after the auction moved slowly, not peacefully. Slowly. There is a difference. When something terrible happens, in a family, people imagine one dramatic moment changes everything. They imagine police cars shouting, doors slamming, and then a clean ending where everyone knows who was right and who was wrong. But real pain does not end that way. Real pain follows you into the grocery store. It sits beside you when you drink coffee alone. It waits in the silence after the phone stops ringing. For the first few days after the auction, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Nathan standing in my backyard. I saw Mason crying beneath that canopy. I heard Ava's violin playing that soft, wounded melody, while strangers stood silent around us. And I kept hearing Nathan's voice. "You don't understand what I had to do," as if he had been forced, as if I had put the gas can in his hand, as if my home Arthur's workshop and the pieces of my life he tried to sell had somehow become the price I was supposed to pay for his mistakes. Claire handled most of the legal work. She told me the estate auction company had agreed to cooperate fully. Once the dispute became clear, the auctioneer stopped all sales, contacted buyers, and held every item that had not already been removed. Some people returned things quickly. A woman brought back my mother's porcelain bowl 2 days later. She stood on my porch holding it carefully with both hands. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I didn't know." I looked at the bowl, at the small blue flowers painted around the edge. My mother had given it to me the day I married Arthur. I had used it for mashed potatoes every Thanksgiving for almost 40 years. "It isn't your fault," I told her. But when she handed it to me, I had to grip the doorframe to keep myself from crying. Other items took longer. Arthur's chair had been sold to a man who lived across town. When Claire called him, he said he had already placed it in his den. He was defensive at first. He said he had paid fairly. He said he had no reason to think the sale was unauthorized. But 2 days later, a delivery truck pulled into my driveway. The chair came back. The man did not come with it. There was only a short note tucked under one cushion. "I'm sorry. I hope this chair belongs where it is loved." I read that note 3 times. Then I sat in Arthur's chair and cried until I had no tears left. The loan application against my house was formally canceled. The bank confirmed that no money had been released and that the credit line had never been approved. Claire explained that this mattered. It meant Nathan had not succeeded in taking the home from me, but it did not erase what he had tried to do. It did not erase the paperwork with my forged signature. It did not erase the way he had stood in my kitchen and acted as though I was too old to understand my own life. The investigation into the fire continued. Mark Dalton visited twice during the first week. The second time, he brought photographs from the workshop and spoke with me at my dining room table where the chairs had finally been returned. He did not give me details I did not need. But he told me the fire scene had raised serious concerns. The wedged side door, the missing ledgers, the chemical residue. Mason's statement. The voice recording Ava had saved. Each piece mattered. Together they told a story Nathan could no longer explain away. I listened to Mark speak, but I felt far away from the conversation. Part of me was still in that workshop on the night it burned, standing in the rain and watching flames swallow Arthur's memories. After Mark left, I walked out to the backyard alone. The workshop remained closed off behind yellow tape. The blackened walls were still standing, though part of the roof had collapsed completely. Every time I looked at it, my chest tightened. I thought I would feel anger, and I did. But underneath the anger was grief, not only for Arthur, for Nathan, for the son I thought I had raised. Brooke called me one evening about 10 days after the auction. Her voice was quiet, not polished, not controlled, just tired. "Charlotte," she said, "I wanted to tell you I moved out." I stood in my kitchen with a dish towel in my hand. For a moment, I did not know what to say. "I'm sorry," I finally told her. There was a long silence. "I don't know if you should be," she said. She explained that she had discovered more of Nathan's debts after the investigation began. Credit cards she did not know about, loans tied to the business, late payments, money he had borrowed from people and never mentioned. "He kept telling me we were close to getting through it," she said. "He always had another explanation, another promise." I thought of all the explanations Nathan had given me. The fire was an accident. The auction was temporary. The loan was help. The lies had changed shape depending on who he was speaking to. "I should have seen more," Brooke whispered. I did not know whether she expected forgiveness. Maybe she did. Maybe she hoped I would tell her she had been fooled too, that she had not known enough to stop him. But the truth was more complicated. "You should have asked me," I said gently. "You should have asked whether I agreed to any of it." Brooke began to cry. "I know." I closed my eyes. For years, I had believed forgiveness meant saying the pain did not matter. Now I knew better. Forgiveness, if it ever came, would have to begin with truth. Not excuses, not tears, truth. "I hope you find a safe place to start over," I told her. That was all I could offer. Mason started counseling. Claire told me he was cooperating with the investigators and had agreed to provide a full statement about what he saw that night. He had also admitted that Nathan promised to help him buy a truck if he supported the auction story. When I heard that, I felt sick. A truck. That was what Nathan had used to buy his own son's silence, a promise of a vehicle in exchange for betrayal. Mason came by one Saturday afternoon without calling first. I was in the backyard, trimming dead leaves from the rose bushes. The early spring sun was pale but warm enough that I had taken off my cardigan. I heard the side gate open. When I turned, Mason was standing there with his hands in his pockets. He looked thinner, not physically exactly, but the confidence had gone out of him. "Hi, Grandma," he said. "Hi, Mason." He stared at the ground. "I'm going to counseling," he said. "I know. I'm trying to do what they tell me. I'm trying to be honest." I nodded. He swallowed. "I keep thinking about Grandpa." That was the first time he had said Arthur's name since the auction. "He would be disappointed in me," Mason whispered. "Yes," I said. His eyes filled with tears. I hated myself a little for saying it, but I could not soften the truth just because he was hurting. "Arthur would have been disappointed. So was I." "I don't expect you to forgive me," Mason said. "I just wanted you to know I'm sorry." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I put down my garden shears. "Being sorry matters," I said, "but it is not the end of the work." He nodded quickly. "I know. Trust is not something you ask for," once I continued. "It is something you build slowly, in small choices, when no one is watching." Mason wiped his face. "I'll do that." I did not tell him I forgave him. Not yet. But I told him he could come back another day. For now, that was enough. A week later, William Bennett came to the house to examine the violin properly. He arrived carrying a black case filled with restoration tools. He moved slowly with the patient confidence of a man who had spent his whole life learning how delicate things could survive. We sat at the dining room table. The violin rested on a soft cloth between us. In daylight, the damage was impossible to ignore. The varnish had blistered in places. The bridge was ruined. One side had deep black scars from the fire, but the shape remained. The scroll remained. The maker's mark remained. William studied it for nearly an hour. He measured the wood. He looked through a small lighted magnifier. He tapped gently in certain places, listening to the sound. Finally, he leaned back. "It can be restored," he said. My breath caught. Really? Yes. It will take time. And it will never look exactly as it did before. Ava sat beside me, holding her breath. William ran one finger near the darkened edge of the violin. "The scars should stay," he said quietly. "Not all of them. We can stabilize the wood and bring back its voice. But the fire changed this instrument. Pretending it never happened would not honor what it survived." I looked at the burn marks. For the first time, I did not see only loss. I saw proof. The violin had survived something meant to destroy it, just like I had. William opened a folder and showed us preliminary information about the instrument's value. Even damaged, it could be worth far more than I had imagined. Enough money to change my life. Enough money to repair the workshop pay bills, secure the future. Enough money that part of me wondered if selling it was the sensible choice. But when Ava looked at the violin, I saw Arthur in her eyes, and I remembered his words. That violin will protect the right person when the time comes. I had thought he meant money. Now I was not so sure. The question was no longer whether the violin was valuable. The question was whether I was ready to let it go. By early summer, the house began to feel like mine again. Not exactly the way it had before. I do not think any home can return completely to what it was after betrayal has walked through every room. Some things come back physically. The furniture, the photographs, the familiar sounds of floorboards beneath your feet. But something inside you remains changed. Still, each morning, I opened the curtains and watched sunlight reach across the living room. I felt a little stronger. Arthur's chair was back beside the window. My mother's porcelain bowl sat safely inside the china cabinet. The old clock above the kitchen doorway ticked steadily again. And slowly, one item at a time, my house stopped looking like a place strangers had searched through and started looking like a place where I belonged. The workshop took longer. The fire investigation remained active, so I could not touch much of the damaged structure at first. But once Mark Dalton's team finished documenting everything they needed, the yellow tape finally came down. The day it was removed, I stood in the backyard for nearly an hour. The workshop looked terrible. One side of the roof was gone. The back wall had to be rebuilt. The windows were shattered, and the inside smelled like wet wood. Old smoke, and the strange sadness of a room that had lost its purpose. But I did not see only ruin anymore. I saw space, a beginning. Ava stood beside me, her arms folded across her chest. "What are you thinking?" she asked. I looked at the blackened workbench where Arthur had spent so many years restoring broken instruments. "I'm thinking your grandfather would hate seeing it empty." Ava smiled faintly. "He would hate seeing it dirty." That made me laugh. It was the first real laugh I had let out in weeks. Arthur had been many things: patient, generous, stubborn, overly proud of his homemade chili, but he could not stand disorder in his workshop. Every tool had a place. Every brush was cleaned before he went inside for the night. He used to say that a messy workspace made a messy mind. I used to tease him about it. Now I missed it. The idea came to me quietly. At first, it was only a thought. Then it became something I could not stop thinking about. I did not want to rebuild the workshop simply to make it look like it had before. I did not want to recreate a room that belonged only to the past. I wanted to build something that carried Arthur forward. So I called a contractor, recommended by one of my former teaching colleagues. His name was David Keller, a patient man in his 60s with kind eyes and a soft-spoken way of explaining things. He came over, walked through the damaged workshop, and listened while I told him what I wanted. "A small music room," I said. "Nothing fancy. Just safe, warm. A place where children can learn." He looked around at the burned walls. "You want to turn this into a studio?" "Yes, for private lessons, for anyone who needs them. David looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. We can do that. The work took nearly 2 months. New walls went up. The roof was repaired. Windows were replaced with wide panes that let in soft afternoon light. We kept one small section of the original wooden beam near the back of the room, darkened from the fire but sanded smooth and sealed beneath a clear protective coat. I did not want every scar erased. William Bennett had been right about the violin. Some scars were not shameful. Some scars told the truth about survival. Ava helped me choose paint colors. She wanted bright white walls, but I chose a warm cream shade that reminded me of old sheet music. We found simple wooden shelves for beginner books, music stands, and donated instruments. Neighbors began offering things before I even asked. One woman from church brought an old upright piano that needed tuning, but still had a strong sound. A retired band teacher donated music folders. A father from down the street offered to build a bench for the waiting area. It surprised me how quickly people showed up when they knew what we were trying to create. For so long, I had felt alone. I had believed that because my own family had hurt me, I had nowhere left to lean. But support came from places I had never expected. From neighbors, former students, parents I had met only once, people who had seen what happened at the auction and wanted to help me reclaim something good from it. The room became known as Arthur's Music Corner. I did not put up a large sign. I did not want it to feel like a business. I simply hung a small wooden plaque beside the door with his name carved into it. Arthur Harris Music Room. The first time I saw it hanging there, I touched the letters with my fingertips. Then I went inside and cried, not because I was broken, because I was grateful. Ava continued practicing every chance she had. William had taken the Vescari violin to his workshop for restoration, and he sent updates every few weeks. He showed us photographs of the repaired bridge, the stabilized cracks, and the careful work being done to preserve the original wood. The burn marks would remain, not all of them. Some had to be repaired, so the violin could be played safely. But the darkened edge along the lower side would stay. It has earned the right to show what it survived. William told us, I understood that. Ava auditioned for the Columbus Youth Orchestra using a borrowed violin from her school. The morning of the audition, she stood in my kitchen wearing a simple navy dress and holding the borrowed case close to her chest. She looked nervous. Not frightened exactly, but nervous in the way people look when they are about to step into a moment they have dreamed about for years. You don't have to be perfect, I told her. She smiled. That sounds like something Grandpa would say. He would probably say, play the first note like you mean it. Ava laughed. Then she grew quiet. Do you think I'm ready? I looked at her. I thought about the girl who had stood in front of strangers and lifted a burned violin beneath her chin. I thought about the way she had played when the entire world seemed to be waiting for her to fail. You were ready the moment you decided not to be afraid of your own voice, I said. She hugged me so tightly that I almost lost my balance. The audition went well, not perfectly. Ava admitted later that one of her fingers slipped during a difficult section. But she did not stop. She kept playing. 2 weeks afterward, a letter arrived. She had been accepted. When she told me, she screamed so loudly that the neighbor's dog started barking. Then we both laughed until we cried. For the first time in many months, I allowed myself to imagine the future without feeling afraid of it. Then Mason came back. It was late one Saturday afternoon. I was in the backyard, watering the new rose bushes David had helped me replant near the fence. The old fence had been built by Arthur years ago. It was nothing special, just weathered wood, a little crooked in places, but he had built it with his own hands. After the fire and the storms that followed, part of it had begun to lean badly. I heard the side gate creak. When I turned, Mason was standing there. He looked different from the last time I saw him. Not dramatically different, but quieter. He wore work jeans and a faded t-shirt, not expensive sneakers or brand name clothes. His hands were empty, except for a small tool bag hanging at his side. "Hi, Grandma," he said. "Hi, Mason." He looked toward the fence. I heard it was falling apart. "It is leaning," I said. "I can fix it." I did not answer immediately. Mason nodded as if he expected that. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said. "I know I haven't earned that." The breeze moved through the rose bushes between us. "I've been helping at a community center," he continued. "Part of my counseling plan. They had me repair shelves, paint walls, carry supplies. I've been learning some things." "Like what?" He looked down. "That saying sorry doesn't make the damage disappear." I stood very still. And that I spent too long doing whatever Dad told me because it was easier than thinking for myself. His voice shook slightly. "I don't want to be like that anymore." I looked at the fence. Then I looked back at him. Mason trust does not return because someone gives a good speech. I know. It does not return because you feel ashamed for one afternoon. I know. It comes back through choices I said. Small ones. Repeated ones. Especially when nobody is standing there to praise you for them. Mason nodded. I understand. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I handed him the gardening gloves I had set on the patio chair. "You can start with the loose panels," I said. "But you will not do it alone. I'll be right here." His eyes lifted to mine. Okay, that was all. No grand forgiveness, no dramatic embrace, just a broken fence, an old tool bag, and a young man beginning to understand that repair took time. As Mason worked, I sat nearby on the back steps. Ava practiced inside the music room, her borrowed violin sending soft notes through the open window. The workshop no longer smelled of smoke. It smelled of fresh wood polish and possibility. And as I listened to the sound of my granddaughter playing, while my grandson quietly repaired what he had helped break, I understood something I had been too hurt to see before. Healing did not mean pretending nothing happened. Healing meant choosing what deserved to grow after the fire. 3 months after Arthur's music room opened, the first community concert took place on a warm Saturday evening in September. By then, the workshop no longer looked like the place that had burned. The new windows reflected the late summer sky. The cream-colored walls glowed beneath soft lamps. Music stands lined one side of the room, and the old upright piano sat proudly near the back wall, polished until it looked almost new. But I had kept one thing exactly as it was meant to be. Along the far wall behind a clear protective panel was the darkened wooden beam from Arthur's original workshop. The burn marks remained, not because I wanted to remember the fire every day, but because I wanted every child who entered that room to understand something important. Damage was not the same as defeat. That evening, folding chairs filled the room from wall to wall. Neighbors arrived carrying small bouquets of flowers and paper programs. Former students of mine came with their children. Parents stood near the doorway whispering softly, while young musicians tuned their instruments. I recognized people from the auction too. The woman who returned my mother's porcelain bowl sat in the second row. The man who had returned Arthur's chair stood near the back holding hands with his wife. Even the auctioneer came quietly and took a seat beside the window. He had sent me a written apology after the investigation began. I had not answered right away, but eventually I wrote back. I told him that he had made a mistake. I told him that I hoped he would never again trust paperwork without looking at the person whose life was being sold. That was all. I did not need revenge from every person who had been there that day. I only needed the truth to be seen. Ava stood near the front of the room, wearing a deep blue dress that made her look older than 16. Her dark hair was pulled back from her face, and her hands rested gently on the violin case beside her chair, not the borrowed violin she had used for her audition. This was the Vescari. William Bennett had completed the restoration 2 weeks earlier. He had called me himself and asked that Ava and I come to his workshop to see it for the first time. I will never forget that moment. The violin rested inside a new case lined with soft gray velvet. The body had been repaired and stabilized. The bridge was fresh. The strings were bright and strong, But along the lower side, where the flames had reached deepest, the wood still carried a dark scar. William had preserved it carefully. It will always be part of the instrument, he told us. And now it will always be part of its voice. Ava had touched the scar with her fingertips and whispered, "It's beautiful." I had cried before I could stop myself. Not because the violin was valuable, not because people now spoke about its rare maker's mark and its history and the amount someone might pay to own it. I cried because it had survived. Because Arthur had been right. Some things only needed someone patient enough to listen for their voice. The room slowly quieted as the concert began. A few of the younger students played simple piano pieces first. One little boy made a mistake halfway through Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, then stopped and looked terrified. The entire room waited. I smiled at him and said, "Start again." He took a breath. Then he did. When he finished, everyone applauded so loudly that his face turned bright red. That was the kind of room I had hoped Arthur's workshop could become. A room where mistakes did not become humiliation. A room where people were allowed to begin again. After the children finished, Ava stepped forward. The soft conversation disappeared. She stood before the audience with the Vescari beneath her chin. The violin looked almost golden beneath the warm lights, except for that darkened scar along its side. I sat in the front row, holding my hands together so tightly that my fingers ached. Mason sat near the back. He had arrived early and helped carry extra chairs inside. He did not ask for attention. He did not stand close to me. He simply worked quietly, then took a seat near the door. Over the past few months, he had continued counseling. He had finished the community service the court required as part of his cooperation with the investigation. He came by every other weekend to help in the garden, repair the fence, or carry supplies into the music room. He never asked if I had forgiven him. That mattered. He understood that forgiveness was not a prize he could demand because he had begun behaving better. He was learning to do the right thing without expecting applause. Nathan was not there. The legal process was still unfolding, and there were days when I thought about him more than I wanted to admit. Claire kept me informed when she had to. The investigation had moved forward. The business accounts were being examined. The forged documents and the evidence from the fire had consequences Nathan could no longer avoid. But I did not speak about him that evening, not because he did not matter, because he no longer owned the center of my story. Ava lifted her bow. Then she began to play. The melody was the same one she had played at the auction. Arthur's melody, the one he used to hum while restoring old instruments. But this time it sounded different. At the auction, the music had been fragile. It had trembled with grief. It had risen from a burned instrument in front of people who were laughing at us. That night, the melody filled a room built from what remained. The first notes were soft. Then they grew stronger. The Vescari's voice was warm and clear, carrying something that made every person in the room lean forward. I watched Ava close her eyes as she played, not because she was afraid, but because she trusted herself now. She trusted the music. She trusted the story inside that violin. And I understood that the room had changed because of her. Not because William had named the instrument, not because Claire had brought legal papers, not because Nathan had finally been exposed. Those things mattered. They brought justice. They gave me back my house, my belongings, and the right to decide what happened to my life. But Ava had changed the room long before any of that. She changed it when Mason called the violin worthless, and she refused to believe him. She changed it when everyone laughed, and she asked for 5 minutes. She changed it when she lifted a burned violin under her chin and made the world listen. The final note stayed in the air for a long moment, then it faded. No one moved. For one heartbeat, the entire room was silent. Then everyone stood. The applause came all at once, loud enough that Ava lowered the violin and covered her mouth with one hand. Tears ran down her face, but she was smiling. I stood too. My knees were not as strong as they used to be, but I stood. I clapped until my palms hurt. Mason was standing in the back, his eyes wet. When Ava looked toward him, he lowered his head, then began clapping harder than anyone. After the concert, children crowded around Ava, asking if they could touch the violin. She let them look closely, but she did not let them hold it yet. Someday, she told one little girl, when you learn how to hold it gently. I watched that exchange from across the room and smiled. Arthur would have loved it. Later, after the guests left and the last chairs were folded away, I stood alone in the doorway of the music room. The lights were low. The new shelves held donated instruments. The old beam carried its burn marks. Ava's violin case rested safely on a table near the window. Mason was outside, locking the side gate. Ava came to stand beside me. "Grandma," she said softly. "Yes, sweetheart. Do you think Grandpa knew all of this would happen?" I looked at the scarred violin, then at the room built from ashes. I don't think he knew every detail I said, but I think he knew people can surprise you, for better or worse. Ava nodded. "And do you think the violin protected us?" I thought about the $40, the laughter, the truth hidden inside a burned case. I thought about the night I first believed I had lost everything. Then I looked at my granddaughter. "It did," I said, "but not because it was worth money." Ava waited. "It protected us because you refused to let the truth be sold for $40. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and for the first time since the fire, I felt completely at peace. My son had tried to take my home. He had tried to turn my memories into auction lots. He had tried to make me feel old, confused, and powerless. But he had failed. Because my voice had not disappeared. It had only been waiting for the right moment to be heard. Ket Thuk Fen Mui Lam by Huk Kuk Sung. There are people who believe kindness means weakness. They see an older woman living quietly in the home she built, and they assume she can be pushed aside. They see patience and mistake it for permission. They see silence and assume there is nothing behind it. But silence is not always surrender. Sometimes silence is a person gathering strength. Charlotte's story taught me that family should never demand your dignity as the price of love. You can care about your children and still protect yourself from their choices. You can grieve what they have become without allowing them to destroy what you have built. Forgiveness may come someday, but it should never be forced by guilt, fear, or pressure. Real forgiveness requires truth, accountability, and changed behavior over time. And sometimes the person who saves you is not the one with the most money, power, or authority. Sometimes it is the person who refuses to stay quiet when everyone else is laughing. Ava did not change the room because she played a rare violin. She changed it because she had courage. She listened to the truth, protected what mattered, and stood beside someone she loved when it was easier to look away. That is the kind of strength no fire can destroy. If this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe for more emotional family stories. Tell me in the comments, would you ever forgive Nathan after what he did? Or would you keep your distance? And please share where you are watching from and what time it is there. Sometimes the deepest betrayal does not come from strangers. It comes from the people we once protected, sacrificed for, and trusted with our whole hearts. That is what makes it so painful. When family members treat your love like weakness, your memories like property, or your silence like permission, it can make you question your own worth. But this story reminds us of something powerful. Being kind does not mean being powerless. Charlotte did not become strong because she stopped loving her son. She became strong because she finally understood that love without boundaries can become a doorway for pain. She learned that protecting yourself is not selfish. Speaking the truth is not cruel. And refusing to be mistreated does not mean you have failed your family. There are moments in life when we must choose between keeping the peace and keeping our dignity. Those choices are never easy, especially when they involve the people we love most. But real peace cannot be built on fear, lies, or silence. Real peace begins when we stop allowing others to decide what we deserve. The burned violin was not valuable only because of its history or its price. It became meaningful because it survived what was meant to destroy it. Its scars remained, but they did not take away its voice. In many ways, that is true for people too. We may carry scars from betrayal, loss, or humiliation, but those scars do not define us as broken. They prove that we survived. Ava's courage also teaches us that one brave voice can change everything. She did not have money, power, or authority. She simply refused to stay silent when someone she loved was being treated unfairly. Sometimes that is all it takes, one person willing to stand up, tell the truth, and remind someone else that they are not alone. Forgiveness may come with time, but forgiveness should never mean accepting repeated harm. Trust must be rebuilt through honesty, accountability, and consistent actions. You can leave the door open for change without allowing anyone to walk back in and hurt you again. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments. Would you forgive Nathan after everything he did, or would you keep your distance? Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe for more emotional family stories about courage, truth, and finding your voice again.